Yo Potterheads, what if during the Battle of Hogwarts, something else survived besides Harry? What if the soul of the last Veela King fused with him at the moment of victory? And now, across Europe, powerful Veela-blood witches are feeling an uncontrollable royal bond awakening. Harry isn't just the boy who lived anymore. He might be the king they've been waiting for. Chapter 1. The sweltering summer heat of Little Whinging was oppressive, hanging over number 4, Privet Drive like a suffocating wool blanket. Inside the smallest bedroom, Harry Potter lay flat on his back, staring at the cracked ceiling. The shadows in the room felt heavy, mirroring the crushing weight in his chest. Sirius was gone. The Department of Mysteries was a fresh, bleeding wound in his mind. But tonight, the grief wasn't just an emotional ache, it was a physical sickness burning through his veins. He felt like he was burning alive from the inside out. Sweat plastered his dark hair to his forehead. His skin felt too tight, stretching over bones that suddenly felt like they were vibrating. It wasn't the familiar, ice-cold prickle of Voldemort poking around in his head. This was entirely different. This was a volcanic, white-hot inferno building in the very marrow of his bones. "Screw this," Harry muttered, his voice raspy and dry. He tried to sit up, but a sudden, violent spasm arched his back off the mattress. He bit down on his lip so hard he tasted copper, refusing to give the Dursleys the satisfaction of hearing him scream. Deep within his bloodline, something ancient and terrible was waking up. For centuries, the Potter family had kept secrets, marrying into obscure, powerful magical lineages whose names had been scrubbed from modern history books. One of those bloodlines carried the dormant soul spark of the first Veela King, a primordial entity of dominant, ravaging fire and absolute, intoxicating allure. It was a genetic lottery, a 1 in a billion chance that the soul would ever find a host strong enough to handle its resurrection. The immense trauma, the constant exposure to deadly magic, and the absolute shattering of Harry's mental state had created the perfect storm. The seal was broken. A shockwave of pure, unfiltered magical energy exploded from Harry's chest. The window glass blew outward, raining down on the manicured lawn. His desk in the corner splintered into toothpicks. Downstairs, Vernon Dursley yelled something furious, but the sound was drowned out by roaring in Harry's ears that sounded like 1,000 wings beating against a hurricane. The scar on his forehead split open. Black, foul-smelling smoke shrieked as it was forcefully violently ripped from the wound. The soul piece of Tom Riddle, which had parasitized him for 15 years, was screaming in absolute terror. It was being evicted, not by a curse, but by an apex predator moving into its territory. The ancient Veela King's magic, pure and untainted, incinerated the Horcrux upon contact. The black smoke dissolved into ash and vanished. Then, the real agony began. Harry's body was literally being rebuilt. He let out a primal, gut-wrenching roar as the white-hot fire consumed him completely. His bones cracked and lengthened with sickening pops. His muscles tore and knitted back together, denser, thicker, and coiled with lethal, predatory power. The malnutrition and physical abuse of his childhood were burned away in seconds, replaced by the towering, flawless physique of a mythical monarch. His magic, usually a volatile, unpredictable thing, snapped into a terrifyingly structured grid of power. It wasn't just flowing through him anymore, it was him. He felt the ley lines of the earth. He felt the pathetic, flickering life forces of the muggles sleeping in the neighboring houses. When the fire finally receded, pulling back into his skin like liquid gold, the room was completely leveled. The walls were scorched black. The bed was nothing but smoldering springs. Harry slowly pushed himself up from the ruined floor. He moved with a fluid, terrifying grace that felt entirely new, yet instinctually right. He didn't need his glasses. His vision was razor sharp, picking up the microscopic dust motes floating in the moonlit air. He looked down at his hands. They were larger, the skin pale but radiating an ethereal, mesmerizing glow. His fingernails were slightly sharper, hardened like diamond. He caught his reflection in a large, jagged shard of mirror leaning against the charred wall. He stopped dead. The kid who had been the Ministry's punching bag, the scrawny, messy-haired boy who survived by the skin of his teeth, was gone. Standing there was a young man who looked like he had stepped out of a mythological war. He was at least 6'3". His shoulders broad and imposing. His raven black hair was now longer, sweeping back from an aristocratic face, streaked with striking veins of liquid silver. But it was his eyes that locked him in place. They were no longer the dull, emerald green of Lily Potter. They were literal rings of white-hot, burning fire, swirling with a hypnotic, dominant power. They were the eyes of a king. The eyes of a conqueror. Well, damn, Harry breathed. His voice was a physical force, deep, resonant, vibrating with a hypnotic frequency that made the floorboards tremble. Every word carried a subliminal command. Outside, the air cracked with the explosive sounds of multiple apparitions. The magical shockwave of his transformation had completely annihilated the blood wards surrounding Privet Drive. The Dursleys' protection was gone, vaporized by a magic far older and far more ruthless than anything Albus Dumbledore could comprehend. Harry tilted his head, listening to the hurried, panicked footsteps on the lawn. He could smell their magic. He could taste their fear and their adrenaline. 4 magical signatures, 3 familiar, 1 intensely, intoxicatingly different. Alistair Moody, Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks, and Fleur Delacour. What the hell is she doing here? Harry thought, though his mind remained startlingly calm. There was no panic, no anxiety, just the cool, calculated processing of an apex predator assessing the field. The Veela King's instincts were bleeding into his consciousness, merging with his own. He wasn't losing himself, he was upgrading. He was done being a victim. He was done playing by everyone else's bullshit rules. Potter, we're coming in. Stand back. Moody's gruff voice roared from downstairs. The front door was blasted off its hinges with a deafening crash. Harry didn't move. He stood in the center of his ruined bedroom, shirtless, his new muscles defined by the moonlight, waiting. Heavy boots pounded up the stairs. The door to his room, already barely hanging on, was violently kicked open. Moody burst in, his magical eye spinning wildly, wand raised and glowing with a lethal curse. Remus was right behind him, eyes wide and frantic. Tonks covered the flank, and stepping into the doorway last, bathed in the hallway light, was Fleur Delacour. Harry, Remus yelled, scanning the charred remains of the room. His eyes swept right past Harry, searching for the scrawny teenager he expected. Lower your wand, Remus, Harry said. The words didn't just hit the air, they hit the Order members like a physical blow. The absolute, unyielding authority in his voice commanded obedience. Remus gasped, his wand hand dropping an inch before he caught himself. He finally looked, really looked, at the towering figure standing in the shadows. Moody's magical eye locked onto Harry and stopped dead. The grizzled Auror took a sudden, involuntary step back, his battle-scarred face going completely pale. What in the absolute fuck? Moody whispered, breaking his usual paranoid protocol. Mad Eye, is that? Tonks stammered, her hair turning stark white in shock. Harry took a single step forward into the moonlight. His silver-streaked hair shifted, and his eyes burned into them, radiating an aura so intensely powerful and suffocatingly dominant that the air grew heavy. It's me, Harry said, his voice a low, rumbling purr that sent shivers down their spines. The wards are gone. I took care of it. Nobody's attacking. Remus was trembling. His werewolf instincts were screaming at him, tearing at his mind to drop to his knees. To bare his throat, to submit to the terrifying apex predator in the room. Harry, what happened to you? You smell like ancient fire. Like a god. I woke up, Harry replied simply. He didn't owe them a goddamn explanation. Not right now, but the real reaction wasn't coming from the werewolf or the Aurors. Fleur Delacour stood frozen in the doorway. The moment Harry had spoken, her breath had hitched. When he stepped into the light, her entire body locked up. Her own Veela magic, usually a proud, alluring force that wrapped around her like a shield, completely shattered. It didn't just break, it surrendered. To a normal Veela, the king was a myth. A legend from the primordial days when magical creatures ruled the earth. The king was the source of their fire. The master of their allure, the absolute sovereign of their bloodline. And he was standing right in front of her. Fleur's heart slammed against her ribs like a sledgehammer. Her eyes dilated, swallowing the blue iris until they were almost entirely black. A desperate, overwhelming heat flooded her veins, pooling in her stomach. It wasn't just attraction, it was a soul-deep, biological imperative to serve. To belong, to bind herself to him. Harry shifted his gaze to her. The moment their eyes met, the world stopped. A visible, shimmering shockwave of silver and gall. D-magic blasted out from the point between them, knocking Tonks backward into the wall and making Moody stagger. The air smelled like ozone, burning roses, and raw, unrestrained power. Harry felt a massive, invisible tether snap into place, hooking directly into his soul. It was a royal bond. The ancient magic recognizing a female of his species and instantly claiming her. He felt her mind brush against his, her terror, her awe. Her absolute, unconditional surrender. Fleur couldn't breathe. The pressure of his aura was a heavy, intoxicating blanket pressing her down. Her legs gave out. She collapsed to the floor, her hands bracing against the charred wood. She looked up at him, her chest heaving, tears of absolute reverence spilling down her cheeks. Mon Roy, Fleur whispered, her voice trembling, laced with a heavy, desperate submission that shocked the Order members to their core. My king. Moody spun around, his wand shaking. Delacour, what kind of dark magic is this? Get up. Harry's eyes flared a blinding white. The ambient temperature in the room skyrocketed. The shadows elongated, wrapping around him like a cloak. He looked at Moody, and the veteran Auror suddenly felt like a very small, very fragile insect. Watch your tone when you speak to her, Alistair, Harry said softly. The threat in his voice was so absolute, so fundamentally terrifying, that Moody actually swallowed hard and lowered his wand. Harry walked slowly across the room, ignoring the terrified stares of his former protectors. He stopped in front of Fleur. Looking down at her, he felt an alien, possessive warmth flood his chest. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was his. The magic demanded it, the blood demanded it. He reached down, his large, glowing hand offering a silent command. Fleur didn't hesitate. She reached up, her trembling fingers wrapping around his. The moment their skin touched, a jolt of pure electricity surged through the room, making the hair on Remus's arms stand on end. Harry pulled her up effortlessly, bringing her flush against his chest. She gasped, burying her face into his neck, inhaling the scent of his ancient fire like a starving woman given oxygen. She trembled violently, completely overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the bond anchoring her soul to his. Harry wrapped one massive arm around her waist, anchoring her to him. He looked over her head at the three dumbfounded Order members. The kid who let Dumbledore dictate his life, the boy who hid in the shadows and took the world's abuse, was dead and buried in the ashes of Privet Drive. We're leaving, Harry declared, his burning eyes locking onto Remus. Take us to headquarters. In Remus, the werewolf flinched, his eyes wide. Yes, Harry. A dark, dangerous smirk ghosted across Harry's flawless face. Tell Dumbledore the rules just changed. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The sensation of apparition had always been a violent, suffocating experience for Harry, a ruthless compression of lungs and bone as if being forced through a garden hose lined with shattered glass. This time, however, the fabric of space didn't dare crush him. It parted. The magic of the universe bent around his new physiology, yielding to the absolute authority of the Veela King's soul blazing within his core. He didn't just travel through the void, he commanded it. When their boots hit the cracked, weed-choked pavement of Grimmauld Square, the displacement of air sounded like a thunderclap. The ambient temperature in the desolate London park spiked instantly, the summer humidity flash boiling into a localized, heavy fog. Harry released his iron grip on Remus's arm. The werewolf stumbled away, gasping for breath, his knees buckling under the sheer, terrifying gravity of the magical transit. Moody and Tonks materialized a fraction of a second later. Tonks immediately fell to her hands and knees, emptying the contents of her stomach into the overgrown grass, her metamorphic ability. IE's short-circuiting as her hair rapidly cycled through neon colors before settling on a dull, lifeless gray. Moody remained standing, but his wooden leg gave a dangerous, splintering groan as he leaned heavily on his staff. His magical eye whirring with a frantic, terrified mechanical whine. Only Fleur Delacour remained perfectly composed. She stood flush against Harry's side, her delicate hand securely anchored in his massive grip. The apparition hadn't affected her in the slightest because she had been enveloped within his sovereign aura, a localized domain of absolute protection. Her silver blonde hair caught the dim light of the street lamps, but the ethereal, intoxicating glow that usually surrounded her was completely absent. She had pulled her Veela allure deep inside herself, burying it, subjugating it to the crushing volcanic presence of the king standing beside her. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, rhythmic cadence, her deep blue eyes fixed on the side of Harry's face with a look of starving, absolute devotion. The biological and magical imperative of the royal bond was a relentless drumbeat in her blood: protect him, serve him, belong to him. Harry didn't look at the Order members. His burning, white-hot gaze was locked on the space between number 11 and number 13. The Fidelius charm, a piece of complex, highly classified spellwork designed to hide a secret within a single living soul. Under normal circumstances, Harry would have had to recall the piece of parchment Dumbledore had shown him a year ago to visualize the house. Not anymore. The Veela King didn't do illusions. He didn't respect human wards. To the ancient, primordial entity that now shared Harry's consciousness, a Fidelius charm was nothing but a fragile, pathetic web of deceit. Harry could literally see the magic. It looked like a series of sickly, gray threads stitched desperately into the fabric of reality, trembling under the weight of his gaze. Harry took a step forward. The concrete beneath his boot cracked. "Harry, wait," Remus rasped, pushing himself upright, his amber eyes wide with a mixture of awe and deep-seated, instinctual terror. His inner wolf was clawing at his mind, screaming at him to expose his throat, to submit to the apex predator that was currently radiating enough raw magic to level the entire city block. The wards. Dumbledore tied them directly to the bloodline after Sirius. After he passed. They're unstable. You can't just force your way. Harry didn't even turn his head. "Shut up, Remus." The command wasn't yelled. It was spoken with a low, rumbling resonance that vibrated through the marrow of everyone present. It was an absolute, telepathic weight that slammed into the werewolf's brain, effectively silencing his vocal cords. Remus snapped his jaw shut, his hands trembling violently as he fought the urge to drop to his knees. Harry raised his free hand, the one not holding Fleur's. His elongated, diamond-hard nails glinted in the darkness. He didn't draw his wand. The holly and phoenix feather twig was still in the pocket of his ruined jeans, but he suddenly realized how useless it was. A wand was a crutch. A restrictor plate designed to funnel weak, undisciplined magic. He was a goddamn volcano. He didn't need a straw to spit fire. He pressed his open palm against the empty air where the front door of number 12 should be. The reaction was instantaneous and apocalyptic. The sickly gray threads of the Fidelius charm ignited, catching fire with a blinding, silver-white flash. The illusion shrieked, an actual, high-pitched scream of tearing magic, as Harry's raw, dominant power flooded the ward stones buried beneath the foundation. The ancient, dark magic of the Black family, a centuries-old tapestry of blood curses, paranoia, and arrogance, recognized the presence of true, terrifying royalty. It didn't fight back, it surrendered. The brickwork of number 12 violently shoved its way into existence, knocking the neighboring houses aside with a deafening groan of bending wood and grinding mortar. The black door, battered and scarred, materialized. The silver serpent knocker, usually dormant and cold, animated instantly. It writhed, sliding down the dark wood to form a perfectly straight line, bowing its head toward Harry's boots. The heavy locks disengaged with a series of rapid, terrified clicks. The door swung open on its own, revealing the pitch-black, suffocating hallway of the most noble and ancient house of Black. "Home sweet home," Harry murmured, his voice laced with a dark, cynical edge. He stepped over the threshold, pulling Fleur gently with him. The moment his foot touched the floorboards, the gas lamps lining the walls exploded to life. But the flames weren't their usual sickly green. They burned a brilliant, blinding white, casting stark, aggressive shadows against the peeling wallpaper. The house itself was breathing. Harry could feel the dark, dormant magic in the walls shivering in his presence. Eager to be commanded, terrified of being destroyed. "Sweet mother of Merlin," Tonks whispered, finally staggering up the front steps, her eyes darting around the brightly lit hallway. The wards. He just bypassed the strongest wards in Britain by touching them. "Albus is going to have a stroke." "Keep your mouth shut, Nymphadora," Moody growled, his magical eye locked onto Harry's broad, muscular back. The scarred Auror's grip on his staff was white-knuckled. "We don't know what that thing is anymore. That isn't James Potter's kid. It's something else entirely. Something old." Harry heard them. His new auditory perception picked up the frantic beating of their hearts, the rush of blood in their veins, the exact frequency of their fear. He ignored them. He was focused on the heavy, thumping footsteps rushing down the main staircase. "What in the name of Godric is going on out here?" Molly Weasley's shrill voice cut through the heavy atmosphere like a rusty saw. She came bustling around the landing, wearing a faded dressing gown, her face flushed with maternal fury and panic. She stopped dead at the bottom of the stairs, her wand raised, expecting Death Eaters. Behind her, Arthur Weasley hurried down, followed closely by the heavy, thumping tread of Kingsley Shacklebolt. The Order had been waiting. They had felt the wards collapse and reform in the span of 3 seconds. Molly's eyes swept over the group. She saw Moody, pale and sweating. She saw Tonks, looking like she'd been dragged behind a bus. She saw Remus, standing rigidly, his eyes locked on the floor. And then, she saw the massive, towering figure standing in the center of the hallway, bathed in white firelight, holding the hand of a breathtakingly beautiful Veela. She blinked, her mind completely rejecting the visual information. The towering man possessed raven hair that cascaded back in thick, silver-streaked waves. His shoulders were wide enough to fill the hallway. His chest a sculpted expanse of predatory muscle visible beneath his ruined, open shirt. But it was the eyes, burning, swirling rings of absolute, white-hot fire, that made her breath catch in her throat. Who are you? Molly demanded, her voice trembling slightly as she raised her wand toward his chest. How did you get past the wards? Where is Harry? Harry tilted his head, a slow, dangerous smirk spreading across his aristocratic face. The movement was entirely predatory, a lion looking at a field mouse that had just squeaked at it. Put the stick away, Molly, Harry said. The sheer concussive force of his voice hit her physically. Molly actually staggered backward, bumping into Arthur. Her wand arm dropped involuntarily. The vocal frequency carried a subliminal wave of pure domination, bypassing her conscious mind and striking directly at her nervous system. Arthur's eyes went wide. Harry, good lord, Harry, is that you? Before Harry could answer, the heavy velvet curtains covering the portrait of Walburga Black violently snapped open. The shrieking, miserable hag of a painting had been awakened by the magical surge. She immediately opened her mouth, her painted face twisting into a mask of pure hatred, ready to unleash a torrent of vile, blood-purist slurs. Filth, mudbloods, scum descending upon the house of my fathers. Blight upon. Harry snapped his gaze to the portrait. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pull a wand. He just let the suffocating pressure of his aura slam into the enchanted canvas. Silence. It was a single word, spoken with the absolute authority of a god. The magical backlash was instantaneous. The paint on Walburga's face literally melted. The enchantment binding her soul echoed to the canvas shattered with a sound like breaking glass. The screaming abruptly cut off as the portrait ripped itself in half from top to bottom, the heavy frame cracking and tumbling from the wall to shatter into 1,000 splintered pieces on the hardwood floor. Dead silence descended upon the hallway. The only sound was the heavy, labored breathing of the Order members. Kingsley Shacklebolt, a veteran Auror who had stood toe-to-toe with Voldemort's inner circle, slowly lowered his wand, his dark eyes wide with shock. Merlin's beard, he breathed. He just killed a permanent soul portrait with a single word. Fleur pressed closer to Harry's side, a soft, involuntary purr vibrating in the back of her throat. The display of absolute dominance sent a scorching wave of heat pooling into her lower stomach. Her Veela biology was practically singing, validating her submission. He was the king. He was absolute. Let's get one thing straight right now, Harry said, his burning eyes sweeping over the terrified faces of the adults who had spent the last 5 years dictating his life, locking him in a cage of ignorance, and using him as a sacrificial pawn. The days of me sitting in a corner and taking orders from a bunch of terrified, reactive old people are over. The little boy who let you lock him in a closet with abusive muggles is dead. The kid who let you send him into a fucking ministry meat grinder blind is dead. He took a slow, deliberate step toward the kitchen doors. Molly practically threw herself out of his way, pressing her back against the wall, her face drained of all color. Sirius died because of your incompetence, Harry continued, his voice dropping into a lethal, venomous register. He died because Dumbledore likes to play chess with human lives, and you all blindly follow him like good little sheep. That stops tonight, Harry, mate, please, Arthur tried, his voice shaking. We're on your side. We've always been trying to protect you. What happened to you? The magic pouring off you, it's suffocating. I evolved, Harry stated coldly. I purged the rotting parasite out of my skull that your precious headmaster knew was there the whole time. And I woke up. He pushed past Arthur, not waiting for a response, and strode into the subterranean kitchen of Grimmauld Place. The long, wooden table was covered in maps, parchment, and half-empty goblets of wine. Heavy iron pots hung from the ceiling. It smelled like stale bread and anxiety. Harry pulled out the heavy, high-backed wooden chair at the head of the table, the seat traditionally reserved for the lord of the house. He sat down, his posture radiating a terrifying, relaxed confidence. He didn't let go of Fleur's hand. He simply pulled her down with him, without a second thought, driven by the intense, intoxicating bond. Fleur bypassed the empty chairs and sank gracefully onto Harry's lap, wrapping her arms around his thick neck and burying her face into the crook of his shoulder. She didn't care who was watching. She didn't care about propriety. The only thing that mattered in the entire universe was the burning, sovereign anchor she was clinging to. Harry wrapped a large, protective arm around her waist, his thumb gently stroking the curve of her hip. The action was intimate, incredibly possessive, and served as a blatant visual warning to anyone who dared question her presence. The Order members slowly filed into the kitchen, looking like a group of condemned prisoners walking to the gallows. Moody stood near the door, keeping his distance. Remus sat at the far end of the table, looking physically ill. Molly, Arthur, Tonks, and Kingsley took tentative seats, none of them daring to make a sudden movement. The silence stretched for 10 agonizing minutes. Nobody spoke. The oppressive, heavy aura radiating from Harry made the air feel thick, like trying to breathe underwater. Then, the fireplace roared to life. The emerald green flames flared brilliantly, and Albus Dumbledore stepped out onto the stone hearth. The supreme mugwump, chief warlock of the Wizengamot, and the supposedly most powerful wizard of the age looked exactly as he always did. His silver beard was tucked into his belt, his half-moon spectacles resting on his crooked nose, and his bright blue eyes twinkled with a manufactured, grandfatherly warmth. He brushed a speck of soot from his midnight blue robes and turned toward the table. "Ah, good evening, everyone," Dumbledore said, his voice light and airy. "I felt the wards shift. It seems we had a slight disturbance, but I see we are all." Dumbledore's voice completely died in his throat. His twinkling blue eyes locked onto the man sitting at the head of the table. The grandfatherly facade shattered in an instant, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. For a man who prided himself on knowing everything, on controlling every variable on the board, Albus Dumbledore was entirely unprepared for the catastrophic anomaly sitting in front of him. He felt the magic before his mind could even process the visual. It hit him like a physical tidal wave. The ambient magic in the room wasn't just heavy, it was old. Older than Hogwarts, older than the Founders. It was a primordial, apex energy that made the Elder Wand in his pocket vibrate with an unsettling, resonant fear. Dumbledore's eyes darted from Harry's towering, muscular frame to the silver-streaked hair, and finally settled on the terrifying, white-hot rings of fire replacing the boy's green eyes. He saw the beautiful Veela girl perched on his lap, completely subjugated by a royal bond that Dumbledore had only read about in restricted, mythic texts hidden deep in the Department of Mysteries. Instinctively, Dumbledore reached out with his mind. A subtle, practiced thrust of legilimency, designed to slip past Harry's normally pathetic mental shields and read the boy's surface thoughts to gauge the situation. It was the biggest mistake of Dumbledore's long life. The moment Dumbledore's mental probe brushed against Harry's consciousness, the Veela King's soul reacted to the intrusion with extreme prejudice. Harry didn't just block the attack, he countered it with the mental equivalent of a nuclear strike. A spike of pure, white-hot agony pierced directly through Dumbledore's mind. The headmaster gasped, stumbling backward and crashing hard into the stone mantelpiece. His half-moon spectacles flew off his face, shattering on the flagstones. He clutched his head with both hands, a localized nosebleed instantly dripping into his silver mustache. "Albus!" Molly screamed, leaping to her feet. "Sit down, Molly," Harry commanded, his voice barely a whisper, yet it slammed her back into her chair as if she'd been hit by a physical weight. Ari stared down the length of the table at the staggering old man. "Do not ever try to enter my mind again, Albus. Next time, I won't just repel you. I will burn your brain to cinders from the inside out." Dumbledore leaned heavily against the stones, wiping the blood from his nose with a trembling, blackened, and withered hand. His chest heaved as he forced his occlumency shields back into place, looking at Harry with a mixture of terror and deep, calculating sorrow. "Harry," Dumbledore wheezed, his voice lacking all of its usual commanding resonance. "My dear boy, what have you done? At dark magic have you allowed into your soul?" Harry let out a dark, booming laugh that rattled the silverware on the table. It was a terrifying sound, devoid of humor, filled with centuries of predatory arrogance. "Dark magic," Harry mocked, his glowing eyes narrowing. "You have a lot of nerve talking about dark magic, Albus. Considering you left a piece of Voldemort's soul festering behind my scar for 15 years. You knew it was there. You knew exactly what I was, and you bred me like a pig for slaughter. You intended for me to die at the right moment to destroy the Horcrux." The temperature in the room plummeted. The Order members turned to Dumbledore, expressions of horror dawning on their faces. "Albus, is this true? Remus whispered, his amber eyes flashing with genuine, feral rage. Did you know? Dumbledore didn't look at Remus. He kept his eyes locked on Harry. It was a necessary evil, Harry. For the greater good. The prophecy. Fuck your prophecy, Harry snarled. The raw power in his voice cracking the heavy wooden table down the center. Fuck the greater good. And fuck you. The parasite is gone. The trauma of the Department of Mysteries, the grief of loss. Ing the only family I had left because you kept me in the dark, it broke the seal. Something older, something far more powerful than Tom Riddle's pathetic, fragmented soul woke up inside my bloodline. It incinerated the Horcrux. It rebuilt my body. It gave me clarity. He gestured lazily with his hand, an aura of sovereign fire bleeding off his fingertips. I am the Veela King, Dumbledore. A genetic anomaly. A true apex predator. The magical world doesn't belong to you, and it certainly doesn't belong to a snake-faced half-blood throwing a tantrum. It belongs to me. It always has. Fleur shifted on his lap, pressing her lips to his jawline, a physical manifestation of her complete agreement. Her scent, a dizzying mix of vanilla, ozone, and burnt sugar, clouded Harry's senses, grounding his rising rage into a cold, terrifying focus. Harry, you must listen to me, Dumbledore pleaded, attempting to regain a shred of his authority. He stood up straighter, though his hands still trembled. This power, it will consume you. The Veela Kings of myth were conquerors. Tyrants. They ruled through subjugation and fear. You are losing yourself. Let me help you. We can find a way to suppress this, too. Suppress this, Harry interrupted, a slow, lethal smile crossing his face. Why the hell would I suppress perfection? For the first time in my miserable life, I am not in pain. I am not weak. I am not a pawn. He leaned forward, the heavy chair creaking in protest. Let me explain the new rules of the board, old man. You are no longer in command. The Order of the Phoenix works for me now, or it dissolves. You will no longer keep secrets. You will hand over every piece of intelligence you have on Tom Riddle, his Horcruxes, and his Death Eaters. If you withhold anything, if you so much as lie to me by omission, I will strip you of your magic and snap the Elder Wand you carry in your pocket in half. Dumbledore froze, his blue eyes widening in absolute shock. How do you know about? I see everything now, Harry stated, tapping his temple with a diamond-hard nail. I see the threads of magic. I see the blood on your hands. I see the manipulation. You are a tired, arrogant, old man playing a game you have already lost. Harry, mate, you can't talk to Dumbledore like that, Ron Weasley's voice suddenly echoed from the doorway. Harry didn't even turn his head. Ron and Hermione had been hovering in the hallway, eavesdropping. The moment Ron stepped into the kitchen, Hermione trailing behind him looking utterly terrified, the dynamic in the room shifted again. Ron was staring at Harry with a mixture of profound jealousy, fear, and deep-seated insecurity. He saw the massive, imposing physique. He saw the staggering power. But most of all, his eyes locked onto Fleur Delacour, the impossibly beautiful woman he had spent the last 2 years drooling over, sitting submissively on Harry's lap, running her fingers reverently through his silver-streaked hair. Get off him, Ron blurted out, his face turning an ugly, mottled red, driven by a foolish, petty bravery fueled by pure jealousy. He took a step toward the table. Fleur, what are you doing? He's completely mental. Come here. The reaction was instantaneous. Fleur didn't cower. She didn't seek Harry's protection. The Veela inside her, perfectly aligned with the king's dominant soul, erupted in defense of her sovereign. Fleur spun off Harry's lap with terrifying, fluid speed. Her beautiful face twisted into a mask of pure, avian fury. Her silver hair whipped wildly around her head as her eyes went completely pitch black. A pair of ethereal, burning wings of localized fire erupted from her back, casting a blinding, scorching heat across the kitchen. She let out a piercing, unearthly screech that shattered every glass in the cupboards. She lunged forward, moving faster than the human eye could track, her hands morphing into razor-sharp talons. Fleur, stop, Hermione screamed. Why? Yanking Ron backward by his robes just as Fleur's talons slashed through the air where Ron's throat had been a millisecond before. Ron fell flat on his back, scampering backward like a terrified crab, screaming in pure panic. Fleur landed lightly on the flagstones, stalking toward him, her chest heaving, her talons dripping with localized magical fire. You dare speak to the king that way? She hissed, her voice layered and demonic. You pathetic, worthless little worm. I will tear your tongue from your throat. Enough, Harry said. The single, calm word cut through the chaos like a scythe. Fleur stopped instantly. The ethereal wings vanished. The talons retracted into perfectly manicured nails. The terrifying, avian monster dissolved, leaving only the breathtakingly beautiful French witch. She turned back to Harry. Her eyes returning to their normal deep blue, though they were still wide with adrenaline. She lowered her head, panting softly, waiting for his judgment. Harry stood up. He moved with a heavy, rolling grace, walking around the broken table until he stood in front of the trembling Weasley boy. Ron was backed into a corner, his face pale, staring up at Harry like he was looking at the devil himself. Hermione was pressed against the wall, openly weeping in terror. She is my bonded queen, Harry said, his voice dropping into a dark, intimate resonance meant only for Ron. Though the entire room heard it. She is tethered to my soul, and I to hers. If you ever look at her with disrespect again, if you ever raise your voice in my presence again, I won't let her kill you. I will rip your magical core out of your chest with my bare hands and feed it to the Dementors. Do you understand me, Ronald? Ron couldn't speak. He simply nodded frantically, tears of absolute terror leaking from the corners of his eyes. Harry turned his back on him, dismissing him completely. He looked at Hermione. The bushy-haired girl was shaking, clutching a book to her chest as a shield. Hermione, I suggest you start reading up on primordial magical theory. Your little textbook spells are going to be useless in the war that is coming. He looked back at Dumbledore, who was still leaning heavily against the mantel, looking older and more broken than he ever had. I am taking Sirius's room, Harry declared, his voice ringing with absolute finality. Tomorrow, I am going to Gringotts. I have vaults to claim, bloodlines to consolidate, and a war chest to open. I suggest you spend the night figuring out how you are going to adapt to the new reality, Albus. Because I am not asking for your permission. Harry held out his hand. Fleur immediately crossed the room, slipping her hand into his, pressing her side against his hip. The intense, burning heat of the bond flared between them, a visible shimmer of gold and silver magic that made the air hum. Let's go, little bird, Harry murmured softly to her, the terrifying dictator tone completely vanishing, replaced by a dark, possessive warmth. Oui, Mon Roy, Fleur whispered, her voice laced with absolute adoration. They walked out of the kitchen, their footsteps heavy on the stairs. The Order of the Phoenix was left in absolute, crushing silence. The chessmaster had lost his favorite piece, and the board had just been flipped over and set on fire. Upstairs, the master bedroom of Grimmauld Place, long locked and cursed since Walburga's death, blew open as Harry approached it. The dark magic within the room didn't resist, it practically rolled out the red carpet. The heavy, dust-covered drapes snapped back, and the thick layer of grime covering the massive, four-poster bed was instantly incinerated by a wave of Harry's ambient magic, leaving the dark silk sheets immaculate. Harry closed the door behind them, the heavy lock sealing with a definitive thud. The moment they were alone, the adrenaline of the confrontation faded, leaving behind the overwhelming, intoxicating reality of their bond. Fleur turned to him, her breathing shallow. She looked up into his glowing, fiery eyes, completely lost in the gravitational pull of his soul. The Veela magic inside her was purring, practically vibrating with the primal need to be close to him, to be claimed by him. You defended me, Fleur whispered, stepping into his personal space, her hands resting tentatively on his broad chest, feeling the heavy, rhythmic thud of his enhanced heart. Against your friends, against the headmaster. Harry looked down at her. The possessiveness in his chest was a physical ache. They aren't my friends. They were my handlers. And you are my soul. There is no universe where I let anyone disrespect what is mine. He reached up, his large, powerful hands framing her face. His thumbs gently stroked her cheekbones. The contrast between his lethal, apex power and the staggering gentleness with which he touched her sent a shockwave of pure bliss through Fleur's nervous system. I am entirely yours, Harry, she breathed, her eyes fluttering shut as she leaned into his touch. My fire, my magic, my life. It is bound to you. I have waited my whole life to find the anchor, and you are a god. I'm not a god, Fleur, Harry murmured, his voice a low, vibrating hum that made her weak in the knees. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. The golden threads of their magic intertwined, weaving a tapestry of absolute, unbreakable devotion. I'm just a king taking back his kingdom. And tomorrow, we start tearing this world apart. End of chapter 2. Chapter 3. The First Rays of Dawn. Did not gently filter into the master bedroom of Grimmauld Place, they seemed to bleed through the heavy, enchanted glass, casting long, bruised shadows across the dark hardwood floor. For the first time in his conscious life, Harry Potter woke up without a screaming nightmare tearing through his skull. There was no flash of green light, no high-pitched, mocking laughter echoing in the hollows of his mind, and absolutely no lingering, sickening phantom pain in his scar. The parasitic rot of Tom Riddle was entirely gone, completely incinerated by the primordial inferno that now served as Harry's core. Instead of waking up in a cold sweat, drowning in the traumatic quicksand of his past, Harry woke up to the intoxicating, heavy sensation of absolute power and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the woman tangled in the dark silk sheets beside him. He didn't open his eyes immediately. He didn't need to. His enhanced senses mapped the room with a terrifying, predatory precision. He could feel the residual dark magic of the Black family cowering in the walls, pulling back from his aura like beaten dogs. He could hear the frantic, hushed whispers of the Order of the Phoenix 2 floors down in the kitchen. Their heartbeats erratic and spiked with adrenaline-laced terror. They had been awake all night, plotting, panicking, trying to figure out how to put the leash back on a monster why didn't even realize they had helped create. A low, vibrating rumble started deep in Harry's chest, a dark, cynical chuckle that vibrated the massive four-poster bed. Let them panic, he thought, the cold, calculating mind of the ancient Veela King seamlessly meshing with his own battered, cynical consciousness. The game is over. The board is mine. He turned his head slowly against the feather pillow, opening his eyes. The white-hot rings of fire that had replaced his irises flared slightly in the dim light, adjusting to the physical world. Fleur Delacour was curled flush against his side, her face buried in the crook of his shoulder, one of her long, flawless legs draped heavily over his thighs. She was deeply asleep, but even in unconsciousness, the royal bond was actively humming between them. It was a tangible, golden tether of pure magic, anchoring her soul directly into his massive, volcanic core. Every time his chest rose, she instinctively pulled closer, subconsciously chasing the overwhelming, dominant heat that radiated from his skin. Her Veela allure, usually a volatile, uncontrollable force that demanded attention from everything around her, was completely silent, locked away and utterly subjugated to the sovereign presence of her king. She didn't smell like the aloof, arrogant Beauxbaton's champion anymore. She smelled like burnt ozone, sweet vanilla, and the intoxicating, heavy musk of absolute, unconditional submission. Harry raised a massive, heavy hand, his diamond-hard nails catching the pale morning light, and gently brushed a strand of silver blonde hair away from her face. His touch, capable of shattering stone and snapping bones like dry twigs, was impossibly light. The contrast was staggering, a terrifying juxtaposition of apocalyptic power and profound, possessive gentleness. The moment his fingers grazed her cheek, Fleur's eyes fluttered open. The deep, ocean blue of her irises dilated instantly, swallowing the whites of her eyes as the bond flared to life. Feeding off his proximity, she didn't gasp, she didn't pull away, she leaned into his palm, a soft, involuntary purr vibrating in the back of her throat, a sound completely alien to human vocal cords. It was the sound of a mythical creature acknowledging its absolute master. "Good morning, my king," Fleur whispered, her voice husky and thick with sleep, heavily laced with her natural French accent. She tilted her head, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to the center of his palm. "Morning, little bird," Harry murmured, his voice a deep, resonant bass that physically vibrated against her skin. He shifted his weight, pulling her fully on top of his broad, muscular chest. Fleur went willingly, her arms wrapping around his thick neck as she rested her chin on his sternum, low, looking up into his burning eyes with an expression of sheer, unadulterated worship. "You did not sleep," she noted softly, her thumbs tracing the dark, silver-streaked hair at the nape of his neck. "I don't think I need to anymore," Harry replied, his gaze drifting toward the ceiling, seeing past the plaster and wood, visualizing the intricate, ancient wards he had shattered and violently reconstructed the night before. "The magic, it doesn't shut off, it just cycles. I spent the last 6 hours sorting through 1,000 years of genetic memory. The bloodline is awake, Fleur. I remember things I never lived. I remember the First War. Not Voldemort's pathetic little temper tantrum. The real war, when we hunted dragons for sport and burned entire continents to ash to establish the bloodlines." Fleur shuddered, A full-body shiver that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with the sheer, terrifying magnitude of the power she was bound to. To a normal witch, his words old sound like the ramblings of a dark wizard descending into madness. To a Veela, it was gospel. It was the history written in her very DNA. They are terrified of you downstairs, Fleur murmured, shifting her hips slightly. Completely unbothered by her nakedness, her entire existence solely focused on his comfort and his will. I can feel their fear through the floorboards. The werewolf is pacing. The old man with the broken mind. He is trying to find a way to trap you. Harry's eyes narrowed, the white fire flaring brilliantly, casting harsh, aggressive shadows across Fleur's beautiful face. The temperature in the room instantly spiked by 10 degrees. Dumbledore can try whatever he wants. His entire worldview is predicated on the idea that he is the smartest man in the room, pulling the strings of lesser beings for the greater good. He thinks power comes from ancient wands and carefully hoarded secrets. Harry sat up smoothly, bringing Fleur with him, holding her effortlessly against his chest. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his boots already forming from the ambient magic in the air, wrapping around his calves in dark, impenetrable dragon-hide leather. He wasn't going to wear the pathetic, hand-me-down rags of Dudley Dursley ever again. He willed his magic outward, and the shadows in the corner of the room coalesced, weaving themselves into a pair of immaculate pitch-black trousers and a heavy, charcoal-gray long-sleeve Henley that stretched tight across his newly expanded, heavily muscled torso. "Get dressed," Harry commanded softly, standing up. He towered over the room, an apex predator fully actualized. "We aren't hiding in this decaying mausoleum. I have an empire to collect." Fleur didn't hesitate. She rolled off the bed, her own magic flaring as a stunning deep blue tailored combat robe formed over her skin, practically humming with protective enchantments. She looked like a Valkyrie stepping onto a battlefield, her silver hair pulled back in a tight, warrior's braid. She walked over to him, standing perfectly at his side, her hand instinctively finding its place in his. Harry didn't bother opening the door. He just walked through it. The heavy oak literally dissolved into ash the moment his shoulder touched it, reforming perfectly on its hinges the second he passed. The display of casual, reality-bending transfiguration was so effortless it was horrifying. The descent down the main staircase was agonizingly slow, deliberately designed to build tension. Harry's heavy boots thudded against the hardwood with the rhythmic finality of a war drum. He could feel the sudden, dead silence that fell over the kitchen below. They knew he was coming. When Harry reached the ground floor hallway, he found his path blocked. Alistair Moody stood in front of the front door, his gnarled, scarred hands gripping his staff so tightly his knuckles were white. His magical eye was spinning frantically, a mechanical blur of panic, unable to lock onto the blinding sun-like magical signature radiating from Harry. Standing next to him was Kingsley Shacklebolt, tall, imposing, and looking severely out of his depth, his wand drawn but pointed carefully at the floor. Behind them, hovering in the doorway to the kitchen, was Remus Lupin, looking physically ill, his amber eyes darting between Harry and the floor, completely unable to meet the Veela King's burning gaze. Molly Weasley was clutching a dish towel to her chest, trembling violently, while Arthur stood in front of her like a human shield. Dumbledore was nowhere to be seen. He had likely retreated to Hogwarts to lick his wounds and consult his endless library of useless, outdated texts. "You're not leaving this house, Potter," Moody growled, his voice rough and laced with paranoid desperation. Dumbledore gave strict orders. "The blood wards are gone. You're a massive, glowing target. The Death Eaters will be swarming London the minute you step past the localized Fidelius." Harry stopped 10 feet away from the Aurors. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't tense his muscles. He just let the sheer, suffocating weight of his aura crash into them like a physical tidal wave. "Move, Alistair," Harry said. The command hit the hallway like a concussive blast. The gas lamps lining the walls flickered wildly and blew out, plunging the corridor into darkness, save for the terrifying localized white fire illuminating Harry and Fleur. Moody staggered back a step, his wooden leg groaning in protest. He tried to raise his wand, his aura instincts fighting a losing battle against the overwhelming biological terror screaming in his brain. "I said, you're not." Harry didn't blink. He just raised 2 fingers. A localized gravitational anomaly slammed into Moody. The veteran Auror didn't even have time to shout. He was violently ripped off his feet and slammed backward into the wall with a sickening crunch of plaster and brick. An invisible, telekinetic vice pinned him to the wall. 3 feet off the floor, rendering him completely immobilized. His wand clattered uselessly to the floorboards. Kingsley instantly brought his wand up, his training kicking in. But his hand was shaking so badly he couldn't form the incantation. "Drop it, Kingsley," Harry purred, his voice dropping into a lethal, mesmerizing register. "Unless you want me to snap your spine and leave you paralyzed for the rest of your miserable, ministry-serving life." Kingsley swallowed hard, his dark eyes wide with absolute shock. He looked at the towering, godlike figure standing in front of him. Recognized the complete lack of hesitation in the boy's eyes, and slowly, deliberately, dropped his wand. It hit the floor with a hollow clatter. "Wise choice," Harry sneered. He turned his burning gaze to Remus. The werewolf was practically folding in on himself, his hands clamped over his ears as if trying to block out a sound only he could hear. "Remus, tell Dumbledore that if he ever tries to put a guard detail on me again, I will return them to him in pieces in a shoebox. I am not his weapon. I am not his student. I am the end of his entire fucking era." Harry didn't wait for a response. He walked forward, stepping over Kingsley's wand, and simply ripped the heavy front door off its reinforced iron hinges with a casual flick of his wrist. The door flew out into the gloomy London street, shattering into splinters against the wrought iron gate. He stepped out into the muggy summer air, pulling Fleur tightly against his side. The smog of London tasted thick and polluted, but to Harry, it tasted like freedom. It tasted like blood in the water. "Where to, Monroy?" Fleur asked softly, her eyes tracking the empty street, her Veela instincts hyper-aware of any potential threat. Though she knew nothing on this continent could realistically harm the man holding her hand. "Gringotts," Harry stated, his voice ringing with absolute, terrifying certainty. "It's time to cash in the bloodlines." He didn't bother walking to the apparition point. He simply commanded the fabric of reality to fold. There was no crack, no sickening twist of space. The world around them simply inverted. A kaleidoscope of shattered glass and blinding light, and in the next microsecond, they were standing at the very edge of the leaky cauldron's courtyard, facing the brick wall that led to Diagon Alley. Harry didn't tap the bricks. He placed his massive palm flat against the center of the wall and pushed his magic forward. The bricks didn't just fold away, they violently exploded outward in a shockwave of dust and mortar, clearing a path 10 feet wide. They stepped into Diagon Alley. It was mid-morning, and the bustling wizarding thoroughfare was packed with shoppers, merchants, and off-duty ministry workers. The noise was a chaotic symphony of shouting vendors, hooting owls, and the clatter of cauldrons. The moment Harry Potter stepped onto the cobblestones, the entire street went dead silent. It wasn't a gradual quiet. It was an instant, apocalyptic hush. The heavy, suffocating pressure of his Veela King aura rolled down the alley like a localized tsunami. Witches and wizards froze mid-step. Owls stopped flying and plummeted to the roofs, cowering behind chimneys. The very air grew thick, heavy with the scent of ozone, ancient fire, and the overwhelming, intoxicating pheromones of absolute dominance. People turned their heads, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and instinctual awe. They didn't see the boy who lived. They saw a mythological conqueror. The sheer size of him, the terrifying, glowing white rings of fire replacing his eyes, the silver streaks in his raven hair, he looked like a warlord stepping out of a nightmare. And at his side, radiating an equally terrifying, albeit submissive, aura of lethal beauty, was Fleur Delacour. A few ministry aurors on patrol near Madame Malkin's reached for their wands, but the moment Harry's burning gaze swept over them, their knees buckled. The magic radiating from him was actively hostile to anyone who harbored aggressive intent. It pressed down on their magical cores, threatening to rupture them if they dared draw a weapon. "Look at them," Harry murmured, his voice carrying perfectly in the dead silence of the alley. "Like sheep waiting for the slaughter. They've been cowering from Tom Riddle for so long. They forgot what real power looks like. They are pathetic," Fleur agreed, her voice laced with venomous contempt for anyone who wasn't her king. She leaned closer to him, her fingers lacing tightly with his. "They do not deserve to look upon you." Harry smirked, a dark, dangerous expression that sent shivers down the spines of the closest bystanders. He began walking. He didn't weave through the crowd. The crowd violently parted for him, people shoving each other into storefronts and alleys just to get out of his path. Nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the heavy, rhythmic thud of Harry's boots on the cobblestones. He walked the entire length of Diagon Alley like a conquering emperor inspecting a newly taken province. He ignored the stares, the whispers, the sheer Unadulterated panic. His focus was singular. The massive, crooked white marble structure of Gringotts Wizarding Bank loomed at the end of the street, a monument to greed and ancient, brutal treaties. As they approached the massive bronze doors, the two goblin guards armed with heavy halberds stiffened. Normally, goblins looked upon wizards with barely concealed disdain, treating them as arrogant, temporary custodians of wealth. But as Harry's aura washed over the steps, the goblins' black, beady eyes widened in absolute shock. Goblins were creatures of the earth, deeply attuned to ancient magic and bloodlines. They recognized the signature washing over them. It wasn't human, it was primordial. It was the scent of the first apex predators that had walked the earth before the wands were ever carved. The guards didn't sneer. They didn't demand a wand for inspection. As Harry reached the top step, both goblins slammed the butts of their halberds into the marble floor in perfect unison and bowed, a deep, 90-degree angle of absolute, unconditional respect. The nation acknowledges the king, the guard on the left rasped in heavily accented English, his voice trembling slightly. The nation knows its place, Harry replied coldly, his voice vibrating with a frequency that made the bronze doors groan. He walked past them without a second glance. The interior of Gringotts was vast, echoing with the sound of 100 goblins scratching away in ledgers and the clinking of coins. But the moment Harry crossed the threshold, the entire bank ceased operations. Every single goblin behind the massive mahogany counters stopped writing. Every teller looked up. The ambient magic of the bank, the ancient, blood-forged wards designed to neutralize dark wizards and thieves, did not attack him. They parted like the Red Sea, recognizing a master code written in his very DNA. Harry walked straight down the center of the hall, ignoring the few terrified wizards in line who were practically pressing themselves against the marble pillars to avoid his gaze. He walked directly toward the raised dais at the far end of the hall, where the head goblin, Ragnarok, sat behind a massive, gold-plated desk. Ragnarok was old, his face a map of scars from the goblin rebellions centuries ago. He was a creature of absolute ruthlessness, a being who respected nothing but power, gold, and blood. As Harry approached, Ragnarok stood up, his black eyes fixed on the towering figure. Harry stopped in front of the dais. He didn't wait to be addressed. He didn't ask for a teller. He tapped into the genetic memory of the Veela King, the ancient language of the deep earth bleeding into his consciousness. Krondar Rel Thok, Veilkor. Gornash Thal Dur. The words tore from Harry's throat in perfect, archaic gobbledygook, the dialect spoken during the First Treaty, a language no human had spoken perfectly in over 1,000 years. It translated roughly to, I claim the deep earth. Bring the blood keys. Ragnarok physically recoiled as if struck. The head goblin's jaw slacked, a look of profound, terrifying awe washing over his scarred face. He looked at the white fire burning in Harry's eyes, felt the crushing sovereign weight of his magic, and immediately dropped to one knee behind his desk. It has been centuries, Lord, Ragnarok stammered in English, abandoning the formalities of banking. The deep vaults have slept. The bloodlines were thought scattered. We did not expect the awakening. I am here to claim what is mine, Ragnarok, Harry stated, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. All of it. The Potter accounts are child's play. I want the Black Lordship. I want the Peverell inheritance. And I want the vault of the First King. I want the seal broken today. A terrified murmur rippled through the hundreds of goblins in the hall. The vault of the First King. Vault 0. It was a myth even among the goblins, a legend of an abyssal charm. Beer located at the very molten core of the earth, sealed by blood magic so old and vicious it would vaporize a modern wizard just by looking at the door. Ragnarok swallowed hard, his sharp teeth glinting. Lord, the rituals to unseal Vault 0, they require a catastrophic amount of magical energy. It requires the presence of the Queen to stabilize the core. Harry pulled Fleur slightly forward. The Veela stood tall, her chin raised, radiating a lethal, defensive aura that dared anyone in the room to question her right to be there. The Queen is here, Harry said softly. And I have magic burning in my veins right now to crack this planet in half. Take us down, now. Ragnarok didn't argue. He scrambled to his feet, barking a series of rapid, guttural commands to the senior managers. The bank erupted into a highly coordinated frenzy. Follow me, Lord, Ragnarok said, bowing low again before gesturing toward a heavily reinforced, solid iron door behind his desk. We must take the abyssal cart. It is a rough journey for those not accustomed. Harry smirked. I'll manage. They passed through the iron door, entering a cavernous, dimly lit staging area. A single cart sat on the tracks, but it wasn't the standard wooden and iron contraptions Harry remembered from his youth. This cart was massive, forged from black dragon bone and reinforced with goblin silver, designed to withstand the crushing pressure and extreme heat of the Earth's mantle. Harry stepped in, helping Fleur up beside him. Ragnar took the controls at the front, his gnarled hands gripping the silver levers. "Hold on," Ragnar warned. He threw the lever forward. The cart didn't just roll, it plummeted. The acceleration was instantaneous and brutal, a sheer, 90-degree vertical drop into the absolute darkness of the London subterranean crust. The wind roared past them with the force of a hurricane, screaming in their ears. They bypassed the standard vaults in seconds. They blew past the IGH security vaults guarded by the blind dragons in a matter of minutes. The air grew rapidly hotter, the smell of sulfur and molten rock bleeding through the magical shields of the cart. Down, down, deeper than any human had ever ventured. The pressure in the air became thick, almost liquid. Fleur pressed herself tightly against Harry, her Veela fire resonating with the ambient heat of the deep earth. She wasn't afraid. With his arm wrapped like a steel band around her waist, she felt invincible. After what felt like an eternity of free fall, the track leveled out with a violently abrupt RK that would have snapped a normal man's neck. The cart screeched to a halt, the dragon bone wheels smoking against the rails. Harry stood up, the heat in the cavern completely negligible to a being made of ancient fire. They had arrived at the absolute bottom of Gringotts. The cavern was massive, illuminated only by rivers of slow-moving, glowing magma that cut through the obsidian floor. The air was suffocatingly hot, rippling with intense thermal distortion. In the center of the cavern, standing 50 feet tall, was a pair of doors forged not from metal, but from a single, impossibly massive slab of crystallized dragon's blood. The doors were covered in ancient, jagged runes that pulsed with a deep, violent red light. Guarding the doors were not goblins. Guarding the doors were two massive, primordial drakes. They were easily 3 times the size of a Hungarian horntail, their scales the color of cooled ash, their eyes burning with intelligent, ancient malice. As Harry stepped out of the cart, both drakes shifted. The sound of their scales scraping against the obsidian was deafening. They lowered their massive, spiked heads, sniffing the air, preparing to incinerate the intruders. Ragnar cowered behind the cart, trembling. "Lord, you must dominate them. They answer only to the blood." Harry didn't draw a weapon. He didn't prepare a shield. He let go of Fleur's hand and walked slowly toward the 2 colossal beasts. The drake on the right opened its massive maw, a terrifying glow building deep in its throat, preparing to unleash a torrent of primordial fire. Harry's eyes flared blindingly white. He didn't just project his aura, he unleashed the full, unadulterated weight of the Veela King's soul. The shockwave of pure, dominant magic slammed into the cavern walls, shattering stalactites and causing the magma rivers to violently surge. "Kneel," Harry roared, his voice a cataclysmic boom that rivaled the sound of a tectonic plate shifting. The magical foe, RCE behind the command hit the drakes like a physical meteor. The fire died in the beast's throat instantly. Both drakes collapsed, their massive legs giving out beneath them. They slammed their jaws into the obsidian floor, whimpering, a pathetic, high-pitched sound entirely unsuited for creatures of their size, and flattened their wings against their bodies in absolute, unconditional submission to the apex predator in the room. Harry walked right past their massive, trembling snouts and approached the crystallized blood doors. He didn't need Ragnar to tell him what to do. The genetic memory guided his hands. He raised his right palm and brought his diamond-hard thumb across it, slicing his own skin. A single drop of his blood, thick, glowing slightly silver, and radiating immense heat, fell onto the center rune of the door. The reaction was instantaneous. The blood didn't just stain the door, it was absorbed. A blinding shockwave of crimson light exploded outward, knocking Ragnar flat on his back. The massive slab of crystallized blood groaned, a sound like a dying god, and slowly split down the middle, grinding inward to reveal the absolute darkness of Vault 0. Harry turned back to Fleur. He held out his bloody hand. "Come, my queen, we claim our birthright." Fleur walked past the cowering drakes, her eyes locked solely on Harry. She took his bloody hand, the contact sending a fresh jolt of intense, possessive heat through their bond. Together, they crossed the threshold into the vault. As they stepped inside, the torches lining the walls ignited in a cascade of brilliant, white-blue Veela fire. The vault was not a simple cavern of gold coins. It was an armory, a library, a museum of ancient conquest. The floor was piled high not with galleons, but with ingots of pure, raw mithril, goblin silver, and metals that hadn't been seen on the surface for a millennium. Racks of weapons, swords forged in dragon fire, spears that pulsed with lethal enchantments, lined the walls. Shelves stretched upward, stacked with grimoires bound in unknown leathers, containing magic that made the unforgivable curses look like parlor tricks. But Harry's eyes were drawn to the center of the room. Sitting atop a massive pedestal of black diamond was a singular object. It wasn't a wand, it wasn't a sword, it was a crown, but it wasn't made of gold or jewels. It was forged raw interwoven strands of what looked like solidified, black lightning. It pulsed with a terrifying, rhythmic heartbeat, radiating an aura of absolute, tyrannical authority. Lying next to it was a heavy, silver ring bearing a crest that predated modern heraldry, a stylized, avian skull wreathed in eternal fire. Harry walked toward the pedestal, releasing Fleur's hand. He felt the echo of his ancestors screaming in his blood, demanding he take his rightful place, demanding he bring the world to heel. He reached out and picked up the ring. He slid it onto the index finger of his right hand. The moment the metal touched his skin, a massive surge of dark, ancient magic shot up his arm, anchoring directly into his magical core. The Black family lordship, the Peverell inheritance, and the Prim Ordeal Veela sovereign claim all fused into one singular, unbreakable title. Then, he picked up the crown. The solidified lightning felt warm to the touch, vibrating violently in his grip. He didn't hesitate. He raised it and placed it upon his head. The world went violently, agonizingly white. A metaphysical shockwave, infinitely more powerful than the one that had destroyed Privet Drive, exploded from Harry's body. It didn't just rock Gringotts, it tore through the Earth's crust, shooting upward like a geyser of pure, unadulterated magical force. High above, on the surface, the sky over London violently shattered. The clear blue summer morning was instantly swallowed by a swirling, unnatural vortex of black and silver clouds. A deafening crack of thunder, completely absent of lightning, shattered every window in Diagon Alley. The magical shockwave washed over Great Britain like a tidal wave. In the headmaster's office at Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest as every silver instrument in his office violently exploded, recognizing the shift in the global magical equilibrium. In a dark, damp manor in Wiltshire, Tom Riddle, Lord Voldemort, violently dropped his wand. Screaming in absolute, visceral agony as the shockwave hit his fractured soul, tearing at his remaining Horcruxes with the terrifying realization that an entity infinitely more powerful than him had just claimed the board. Back in the abyss of Vault Zero, Harry slowly lowered his hands. The crown of black lightning rested perfectly in his raven hair, the silver streaks in his locks glowing brilliantly. His physical form seemed to hum, a dense, localized gravity well of absolute power. Fleur dropped to her knees in front of him, overwhelmed by the sheer, godlike magnitude of his presence. She bowed her head, weeping silent tears of pure, religious reverence. Harry looked down at his hands, feeling the ancient, terrible magic singing in his veins. He wasn't a wizard anymore. He was a force of nature. He was a cataclysm walking in human skin. He looked toward the entrance of the vault, where Ragnarok was currently pressing his face into the obsidian floor in absolute terror. Ragnarok, Harry's voice echoed, sounding like a chorus of 1,000 ancient kings. Yes, my lord, the goblin screamed, refusing to look up. Draft the treaties, Harry commanded coldly, his burning eyes narrowing. Empty the Black and Potter vaults, liquidate the assets, and transfer everything into this war chest. Tell the Goblin Nation that the era of bending the knee to the Ministry of Magic is over. You answer only to me now. Any goblin who defies this edict will be fed to the drakes. It shall be done, my lord. Ragnarok swore, shaking violently. The nation stands behind the king. Harry reached down and gently pulled Fleur to her feet. He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb, the terrifying, tyrannical aura softening instantly into a dark, possessive warmth just for her. Are you ready, my queen? He asked softly, a dangerous smirk playing on his lips. Because when we step out of this bank, the war begins. And I don't plan on leaving any survivors who stand in our way. Fleur looked up at him, her Veela fire reigniting, her deep blue eyes swirling with absolute devotion and a newfound, bloodthirsty confidence. Burn it all down, Harry, she whispered. I will dance in the ashes with you. Harry laughed, a deep, booming sound that echoed through the abyss. He turned, pulling her tightly to his side, and began the long walk back to the surface. He had inherited the soul of a king, but he was about to prove he possessed the ruthlessness of a god. The wizarding world thought they were fighting a war between light and dark. They were entirely unprepared for the absolute devastation of the Veela fire. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. The ascent back to the surface was completely silent. The abyssal cart tore upward through the earth's crust, defying gravity with violent, sickening speed, but Harry barely registered the kinetic force. His entire being was vibrating at a frequency that felt like it was tearing the very fabric of reality apart at the seams. The crown of black lightning didn't sit on his head like a physical object of metal and jewel, it had fused with his magical core, sinking into his raven hair to form a jagged, pulsing halo of dark, lethal energy that was visible only when he flexed his sovereign power. The black family ring on his index finger was a heavy, cold anchor, feeding centuries of dark, blood-soaked aristocratic magic directly into his veins. He was no longer just the host of a dormant soul. The assimilation was absolute and permanent. The abused teenager who had been locked in a cupboard under the stairs had been violently burned away, leaving only the cold, calculating, and ruthless intellect of a primordial conqueror. He possessed Harry's memories, Harry's grudges, and Harry's hatred for the people who had manipulated him. But they were now weaponized by a mind that had built empires before humans even knew how to forge iron. Fleur stood pressed flush against his side as the cart screamed up the tracks. She hadn't let go of his hand since they left Vault Zero. Her deep blue eyes were blown wide, completely swallowed by the black of her dilated pupils. The residual ambient magic radiating from Harry was so intense it was basically functioning as a heavy narcotic to her Veela biology. She was intoxicated by it, her breathing shallow, her chest heaving as she absorbed the sheer, suffocating dominance of her king. The bond tethering them together felt like a thick cable of solid gold, humming with a heat that made her skin flush. "They're waiting for us," Harry said, his voice a low, rumbling bass that vibrated over the deafening roar of the cart's wheels. He wasn't looking at her. His glowing, white-hot eyes were fixed on the rapidly approaching ceiling of the cavern. "Who?" Fleur asked, her voice breathy, her grip on his hand tightening. Her own magic began to coil, the ethereal, localized fire shimmering just beneath her skin, preparing to defend him. "The Ministry," Harry sneered, the word dripping with pure, unadulterated contempt. "The shockwave we set off down there. It completely scrambled the magical grid across the entire country. The wards over Diagon Alley are on lockdown. I can feel their pathetic little magical signatures massing in the lobby." "Do we kill them?" she asked. The question wasn't posed with hesitation or moral conflict. It was a genuine tactical inquiry. The royal bond had entirely rewritten her priorities. The laws of Wizarding Britain meant absolutely nothing to her anymore. The only law was the man holding her hand. Harry looked down at her, a slow, dangerous smirk curving his aristocratic features. He reached up, his thumb brushing over her lower lip. "We don't slaughter the sheep unless they try to bite, little bird. We're going to break their spirits first. I want them on their knees." The cart slammed into the staging area behind Ragnarok's desk with a concussive boom that sent a cloud of pulverized dragon bone dust into the air. The heavy iron doors were already wide open. The main hall of Gringotts was a ghost town. The hundreds of goblins that had been manning the mahogany desks were gone, having retreated to the lower levels under Ragnarok's strict orders to clear the blast zone. The bank had locked down, its ancient, blood-forged wards sealing the vaults tight. Harry stepped out of the cart, pulling Fleur with him. His heavy boots thudded against the marble floor. As they walked toward the massive bronze entrance doors, the sheer scale of the situation outside became apparent. Through the thick, enchanted glass of the foyer windows, Harry could see that Diagon Alley had been completely evacuated of civilians. In their place was a heavily armed military blockade. At least 80 aurors and hid wizards stood in tight, tactical formations, their wands drawn and leveled directly at the bank. Anti-apparition wards, thick, shimmering domes of sickly yellow magic, had been layered over the street. So heavily the air looked like it was curdling. Standing at the absolute rear of the formation, flanked by his personal guard, was Cornelius Fudge. The Minister of Magic was sweating profusely, his ridiculous lime-green bowler hat clutched in his trembling hands. Next to him stood Rufus Scrimgeour, the head of the Auror office, looking like an aging lion, his tawny hair blowing in the localized magical wind. His eyes narrowed in grim determination. They had felt the cataclysmic surge of power. They had watched the sky turn black, and their archaic, reactive ministry protocols had told them to surround the epicenter and point their sticks at it. "It's a meat grinder," Harry murmured, his glowing eyes scanning the tactical layout with the effortless precision of a seasoned warlord. 80 wands. Standard ministry suppression tactics. They think they're cornering a rogue dark wizard. They are cornering a god, Fleur hissed, her voice layered with that terrifying, avian duality. Our silver hair began to float around her face, defying gravity as her Veela combat state threatened to surface. "Let's go say hello," Harry purred. He didn't bother pushing the massive bronze doors open. He just kept walking. When he was 3 feet away, the heavy metal doors didn't just swing open, they violently blew completely off their hinges. The explosion sounded like a military artillery strike. The massive bronze slabs, weighing several tons each, tore through the air and slammed into the cobblestones outside, completely pulverizing the stone stairs and sending a shockwave of dust and debris washing over the aura blockade. A collective shout of pure panic erupted from the ministry forces. Several aurors instinctively fired off stunners and blasting curses in the blind dust, the red and orange spells streaking through the air like tracer fire. Harry stepped out of the dust cloud, entirely untouched. The spells that had been fired at him hadn't missed, they had simply disintegrated the moment they made contact with his sovereign aura. The white-hot rings of fire replacing his eyes cut through the smog-like dual lighthouses of pure, unadulterated violence. The jagged, CK lightning crown pulsed rhythmically above his head, bleeding dark energy into the atmosphere. Fleur stepped out right behind him, bathed in his terrifying light, her deep blue robes practically glowing against the gray ash settling around them. "Hold your fire," Scrimgeour roared, physically shoving an overeager auror's wand down. The grizzled veteran stepped forward, his eyes wide with shock. As he finally got a clear look at the target. He had expected Voldemort. He had expected a platoon of Death Eaters. He had not expected a towering, 6'3" juggernaut radiating an aura so dense it was actually making the air temperature spike. And he certainly hadn't expected the face of the boy the ministry had spent the entire last year dragging through the mud in the Daily Prophet. "Potter," Scrimgeour breathed, his voice cracking with disbelief. Fudge pushed his way past his guards, his face a mottled, terrified purple. He looked at Harry, taking in the impossible physical transformation, the swirling white fire in his eyes, and the sheer, suffocating pressure pushing down on the street. "Potter," Fudge shrieked, his voice jumping a full octave in pure panic. He pointed a trembling, fat finger at Harry. "What is the meaning of this? You are the source of that catastrophic discharge. The entire ministry grid is fried. You are under arrest. Lay down your wand and surrender immediately." Harry stopped at the bottom of the ruined stairs. He looked at Fudge. The silence that stretched between them was heavy, pregnant with the promise of extreme violence. Then, Harry laughed. It wasn't a teenager's laugh. It was a dark, booming, baritone sound that vibrated the glass in every storefront on the street. It was the sound of an apex predator looking at a cocker that had just demanded its surrender. "Arrest me?" Harry asked, his voice echoing off the brick walls, entirely stripped of its human frailty. "You brought 80 wands to arrest me, Cornelius. You should have brought an army. And even then, you'd just be giving me more collateral damage." "Insolent brat," Fudge yelled, trying desperately to maintain his authority in front of his men. "You are violating a dozen statutes of the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery. You are suspected of using highly illegal dark magic. Aurors, restrain him." Not a single auror moved. Their wands were raised, but their hands were shaking. The survival instincts buried deep in their human DNA were screaming at them. The aura bleeding off Harry Potter was fundamentally terrifying. It was a localized gravitational pressure that made their lungs feel like they were filled with wet sand. "Scrimgeour," Fudge demanded, turning to the head auror. "I gave an order." "Minister, look at him," Scrimgeour growled, his eyes never leaving Harry. The veteran auror's instincts were redlining. "That isn't a wizard. The magic rolling off him, it's overriding the anti-apparition wards just by existing. If we engage, we are going to lose people. I said, restrain him." Fudge screamed, completely losing his mind to the terror of losing control. An eager, newly minted hit wizard in the front row, desperate to prove himself, tightened his grip on his wand. "Incarcerus," he shouted, snapping his wand in a violent arc. Thick, heavy iron ropes erupted from the tip of his wand. "Rock. heading toward Harry's chest like torpedoes. Harry didn't even flinch. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't speak an incantation. He just looked at the ropes. A foot away from his chest, the iron ropes violently stopped in midair. They hung suspended for a fraction of a second, trembling violently, before they instantly flash-melted into a puddle of glowing slag on the cobblestones. The hit wizard gasped, taking a step back. "My turn," Harry stated softly. He raised his right hand and snapped his fingers. The sound was like a whip crack that echoed through the alley. The magical backlash was instantaneous and devastating. The localized gravity around the aura formation abruptly tripled. 80 fully grown, combat-trained witches and wizards were simultaneously violently slammed onto their knees. Wands shattered in their hands as the pressure crushed them into the cobblestones. Several aurors screamed in agony as their collarbones and wrists fractured under the sudden, massive weight. Fudge hit the ground face first, his bowler hat rolling away into the gutter. He wheezed, entirely unable to draw breath, pinned to the street by an invisible, suffocating hand. Only Scrimgeour, through sheer, bloody-minded willpower and raw magical resistance, managed to stay on one knee, his teeth gritted so hard his gums bled, glaring up at Harry with a mixture of hatred and absolute awe. "This is the problem with your entire society," Harry said, his heavy boots slow and deliberate as he walked forward into the center of the downed aura formation. Fleur walked flawlessly at his side, stepping over groaning hit wizards with absolute, regal disdain, her heels clicking against the stones. "You build your entire world on the illusion of control. You pass laws, you hide behind desks, and you pretend that a wooden stick makes you powerful." Harry stopped right in front of the prone Minister of Magic. He looked down at Fudge, who was staring up at him with tear-filled, bloodshot eyes. Completely paralyzed by the gravitational pressure. "You let Dumbledore use me as a scapegoat," Harry continued, his voice dropping into a dark, intimate resonance that chilled the blood of everyone listening. "You dragged my name through the mud because you were too much of a coward to face the reality of Tom Riddle. And while you were busy playing politics, you entirely missed the real threat." Harry crouched down, his massive, imposing frame casting a long, dark shadow over the minister. "I am the real threat, Cornelius. I am the Veela King. And as of this exact second, your ministry is dissolved. You can't." Fudge choked out, a thin line of drool running down his chin as the pressure squeezed his lungs. The Wizengamot answers to power," Harry interrupted coldly. "And right now, I have enough power in my left hand to erase London from the map. You are entirely irrelevant." Before Harry could finalize the subjugation, the temperature in the alley suddenly plummeted. The heavy, muggy summer air turned to ice. A sharp, sickly sweet smell of rotting flesh and dark magic flooded the street. The anti-apparition wards, already severely weakened and completely overloaded by Harry's presence, violently shattered like glass. Crack, 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 crack. Black smoke trails slammed into the cobblestones at the far end of the alley, near the entrance to Nocturne Alley. The smoke cleared instantly, revealing 20 figures clad in heavy black robes, their faces hidden behind polished silver skull masks. The Death Eaters had arrived. Voldemort had felt the agonizing shockwave tear through his Horcruxes. In a blind panic, assuming the Ministry had unleashed some catastrophic new weapon, or that Dumbledore had finally made a move, the Dark Lord had deployed his heaviest hitters to investigate the anomaly in Diagon Alley. Standing at the front of the pack, her mask pushed up to reveal her gaunt, mad face, was Bellatrix Lestrange. Her wild, dark hair blew in the wind, her dark eyes wide with manic excitement. Flanking her were Antonin Dolohov, Walden McNair, and Augustus Rookwood. They saw the Aurors pinned to the ground. They saw the shattered doors of Gringotts. And then, they saw the massive, towering figure standing in the center of the destruction, wearing a crown of black lightning. Bellatrix let out a shrill, hysterical cackle that bounced off the brick walls. She hadn't recognized him. The physical transformation was too extreme. Well, Bellatrix shrieked, twirling her wand in her fingers, completely misreading the apocalyptic danger she had just stepped into. "What do we have here? Some new player on the board? Did you do all this, big boy? The Dark Lord is going to be very interested in tearing you apart to see how you tick." Harry slowly stood up from Fudge's prone body. He turned to face the Death Eaters. The white-hot rings in his eyes flared brilliantly, burning through the gloom. He felt a dark, violent thrill course through his veins. The Ministry was pathetic, but these people, these were the monsters who had murdered Sirius. These were the rabid dogs that needed to be put down. Fleur, Harry murmured, his voice deadly calm. Yes, my king, she replied instantly, her own magic flaring, her eyes bleeding out into solid pitch black. Kill the flank, Harry ordered casually, as if asking her to fetch him a glass of water. Leave the bitch to me. With pleasure, Fleur hissed. The combat that followed wasn't a duel. It wasn't a battle. It was a televised execution. Harry didn't draw a wand. He didn't shout an incantation. He simply vanished. He didn't apparate. He utilized the raw, primordial physical speed of his Veela biology. To the human eye, he literally ceased to exist in the center of the alley and instantly materialized directly in front of Walden McNair, the massive ministry executioner. McNair didn't even have time to blink, let alone raise his wand. Harry's massive right hand shot out, his diamond-hard fingers clamping around McNair's throat with the force of an industrial vice. He lifted the massive Death Eater clean off the ground with one arm. McNair choked, his eyes bulging behind his silver mask, his hands scrabbling uselessly against Harry's forearm. You like killing things, Walden? Harry asked, his voice a vibrating, demonic hum that resonated in the Death Eater's skull. Harry channeled the raw, white-hot fire of his core directly into his palm. He didn't burn McNair from the outside. He flash-boiled the blood inside the man's jugular. McNair's scream was completely muffled by Harry's grip. The Death Eater's eyes literally boiled in his skull. His skin blistered and charred black in a fraction of a second. Harry casually tossed the smoking, lifeless husk of the man into the brick wall of flourish and blots, where it hid with a sickening thud and crumbled into ash. Total elapsed time, 2 seconds. Kill him, Dolohov roared, sheer, absolute terror finally breaking through his dark fanaticism. He snapped his wand, unleashing a torrent of lethal purple flame, his signature curse, directly at Harry's chest. Harry didn't dodge, he stood entirely still. The dark magic hit his chest and exploded violently, engulfing his entire upper body in purple fire. The Death Eaters paused, thinking they had landed a lethal blow. A dark, booming laugh echoed from inside the flames. Harry stepped out of the inferno. The fire hadn't even singed the dark fabric of his Henley. He raised his hand, the black family ring glowing with a sickening toxic green light. My turn, Harry sneered. He punched the empty air. A concussive shockwave of solid kinetic force, laced with the ancient, blood-boiling curse of the black bloodline, ripped through the alley. It hit the left flank of the Death Eaters like a freight train. 5 masked figures were instantly pulverized, their bones shattering into dust as they were violently thrown backward. Their bodies violently rupturing before they even hit the ground. While Harry decimated the vanguard, Fleur engaged the right flank. She was beautiful, lethal, and completely unrestrained. The heavy blue robe swirled around her as she sprinted forward. A Death Eater fired a killing curse at her. The green light streaked toward her chest. Fleur didn't block it, she spun elegantly, letting the curse pass harmlessly over her shoulder, and lunged. Her hands morphed, her fingernails elongating into razor-sharp, obsidian Veela talons. She slammed into a Death Eater, her momentum carrying them both to the cobblestones. With a feral, avian screech, she plunged her talons directly into the wizard's chest, violently tearing through his ribcage and ripping his magical core entirely out of his body. The man died instantly, his body going limp as Fleur tossed the glowing, dissipating energy aside. She stood up, blood splattered across her flawless face, her pitch black eyes locking onto Rookwood. The former unspeakable backed away in absolute horror, realizing he wasn't fighting a witch, he was fighting an apex magical predator off her leash. Avada Kedavra, Rookwood screamed in blind panic. Fleur just smiled, a terrifying, blood-stained expression. She snapped her fingers. The localized air around Rookwood instantly flash-froze. The Death Eater was encased in a solid block of enchanted, sub-zero ice before the green light even left his wand. Fleur casually walked up to the frozen block and tapped it with one talon. The ice, and the man inside it, shattered into a million bloody, frozen pieces. In the center of the carnage, Bellatrix Lestrange stood completely frozen. Her wand was raised, but her arm was shaking violently. The manic, arrogant smirk had completely vanished from her gaunt face, replaced by pure, instinctual, biological terror. In less than 30 seconds, her entire strike team had been completely annihilated with zero effort. The towering, terrifying God King slowly turned his burning eyes toward her. He didn't walk, he stalked. Every step he took vibrated the ground. The crown of black lightning flared aggressively above his head. He stopped 3 feet away from her. "Hello, Bella," Harry said softly. Bellatrix gasped, her dark eyes widening to impossible proportions. She recognized the voice. Stripped of its weakness, vibrating with god-like power, it was still unmistakably him. "Potter," she whispered, her voice cracking, completely devoid of its usual insane bravado. What are you?" "I'm the thing that bumps back in the night," Harry replied coldly. Bellatrix screamed, a primal sound of absolute terror, and thrust her wand directly at his face. Crucio. The red beam of torture magic shot from her wand. Harry didn't even blink. He reached up with his bare hand and physically caught the curse. Bellatrix watched in complete, mind-breaking horror as Harry gripped the beam of red light as if it were a physical rope. He squeezed his fist. The unforgivable curse shattered like brittle glass in his grip, dissolving into harmless red sparks. "You killed my godfather," Harry said, his voice dropping into a register that made the cobblestones tremble. He stepped forward, his massive hand shooting out and wrapping around her throat. He lifted her off her feet. Bellatrix kicked and thrashed, dropping her wand, her hands clawing desperately at his iron grip, completely unable to breathe. Harry didn't kill her immediately. He wanted her to feel it. He violently forced his presence into her mind. He didn't use legilimency, he used a battering ram of pure, sovereign will. He tore through her insane, fractured occlumency shields like tissue paper. He ripped through her memories, ignoring the atrocities, ignoring the madness, searching for one specific piece of information. He found it. Malfoy Manor, Wiltshire. The catacombs beneath the drawing room. That was where the snake-faced bastard was hiding. Harry withdrew violently from her mind, leaving her consciousness completely shattered. Bellatrix's eyes rolled back in her head, blood weeping from her nose and ears. "Tell Tom I'm coming," Harry whispered, his glowing eyes burning into her dying face. "Tell him the king is going to take his crown." Harry didn't drop her. He channeled his ambient gravity magic, completely inverting the gravitational pull directly around her body. He let go of her throat. Bellatrix Lestrange was violently, impossibly launched directly upward into the sky. She shot into the atmosphere like a rocket, tearing through the cloud cover at Mach 2, her body completely subjected to the lethal forces of friction and pressure. She was a dead, pulverized smear in the stratosphere before she even stopped screaming. Silence descended upon Diagon Alley once again. The stench of ozone, blood, and burnt meat was incredibly thick. The entire cobblestone street was completely destroyed, cratered and scorched. The remaining Aurors were still pinned to the ground, having watched the entire, god-like slaughter in absolute, paralyzing horror. They had spent years terrified of the Death Eaters, and they had just watched Harry Potter exterminate an entire elite strike squad in less than a minute with his bare hands. Fleur walked over to Harry, wiping a streak of Death Eater blood from her cheek. Her breathing was completely normal. She looked up at him, her Veela fire settling back down into a heavy, localized purr of absolute devotion. "They are all dead, my king." "Good," Harry replied, his voice entirely devoid of remorse. He turned his attention back to the Ministry forces. He released the gravitational pressure. 80 Aurors collectively gasped, sucking in air like drowning men breaking the surface. They collapsed onto their sides, coughing, clutching broken ribs and shattered wrists. Nobody reached for a wand. Nobody even looked at him. They were entirely, utterly broken. Harry walked slowly back to Cornelius Fudge. The minister had managed to push himself up onto his hands and knees, covered in dirt, weeping openly, a puddle of urine spreading beneath his legs. Harry reached down, grabbing Fudge by the scruff of his expensive, pinstriped robes, and hoisted him to his feet. Fudge dangled there, whimpering like a beaten dog. "Listen to me very carefully, Cornelius. Because I am only going to say this once," Harry commanded, his voice carrying the absolute, tyrannical weight of his bloodline. "You are going to walk back to your pathetic ministry. You are going to convene the Wizengamot. And you are going to formally draft a total, unconditional surrender of the government to the Veela crown. You will hand over all intelligence on Voldemort's remaining forces. You will open the Department of Mysteries to me. If you hesitate, if you try to stall, or if you ever send orders against me again." Harry leaned in close, the white fire in high eyes burning directly into Fudge's soul. "I will walk into the atrium, I will slaughter every single person in the building, and I will hang you from the ceiling of the Great Hall. Do we have an understanding?" Fudge couldn't speak, he just nodded frantically, his multiple chins shaking, tears streaming down his face. Harry let him go. Fudge collapsed backward into the dirt, scrambling away on his hands and knees, desperately trying to put distance between himself and the cataclysm standing in front of him. "Get out of my sight," Harry ordered, not just to Fudge, but to the entire Auror force. "All of you, run back to your desks and wait for your orders. The ministry is mine." It was a complete, humiliating rout. The injured Aurors dragged themselves to their feet, supporting each other. They didn't bother forming ranks. They stumbled backward, terrified to turn their backs on him, dragging the weeping minister of magic with them. One by one, they staggered past the shattered anti-apparition wards and vanished with frantic, desperate cracks, fleeing for their lives. In less than 5 minutes, Harry Potter had single-handedly broken the military backbone of Wizarding Britta. In slaughtered Voldemort's inner circle, he stood in the center of the ruined street, the heavy silence returning. The black lightning crown pulsed steadily, feeding off the ambient destruction. He looked down at his hands, feeling the sheer, terrifying magnitude of the power at his disposal. He wasn't tired. He didn't feel drained. He felt like he was just getting started. Fleur slipped her arms around his waist from behind, pressing her soft body against his broad, muscular back. She rested her cheek between his shoulder blades, completely unbothered by the carnage surrounding them. The violence hadn't repulsed her. It had validated her. Her king was absolute. "You have conquered them," Fleur murmured softly, her French accent thick and incredibly intimate. "The government is broken. The Dark Lord is blind. What is our next move?" Harry reached back, laying his large hand over hers, his thumb stroking her knuckles. His mind was already moving 1,000 steps ahead, the NT strategic genius of the Veela King mapping out the global conquest. The ministry was just a stepping stone. Voldemort was just a pest control problem. The real prize was restructuring the entire magical world. "We don't go back to Grimmauld Place," Harry said, his voice cold, focused, and entirely lethal. "The Order of the Phoenix is a dead asset. Dumbledore is going to try and rally his little resistance. Let him. He's irrelevant now." He turned around, wrapping his arms around Fleur, pulling her flush against his chest. He looked down into her deep blue eyes, the possessive fire burning fiercely in his chest. "Where are we going, then?" she asked, leaning into his touch, utterly submissive to his will. Harry looked past her, his gaze fixing on the horizon, seeing the magical ley lines crisscrossing the country, converging on a specific, ancient location. A dark, terrifying smirk played on his lips. "We are going to Wiltshire," Harry stated, his voice ringing with absolute, apocalyptic finality. "I have a snake to skin. And then, I am going to claim a new castle." He didn't wait for her reply. He simply folded the fabric of reality around them. Diagon Alley, shattered, smoking, and utterly defeated, was left empty as the Veela King and his queen vanished into the ether, heading straight for the heart of the darkness, entirely prepared to burn it to the ground. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. The sprawling, manicured grounds of Malfoy Manor in Wiltshire were entirely silent, bathed in the sickly, pale light of a crescent moon. The heavy iron gates at the entrance of the estate stood tall and imposing, wrought with the twisting, arrogant serpentine crest of the ancient pureblood family. Beyond the gates, a long, sweeping gravel driveway cut through an ocean of perfectly trimmed hedges, leading up to the massive, looming silhouette of the manor house itself. For decades, this estate had been a fortress of dark magic, political corruption, and aristocratic untouchability. Tonight, it was a tomb waiting to be sealed. The silence was completely violently shattered. There was no crack of apparition. There was no warning ripple in the wards. The fabric of reality simply tore open with a deafening, apocalyptic boom that sounded like the sky itself was fracturing. The atmospheric pressure over the estate instantly plummeted, flash freezing the dew on the perfectly manicured grass. Harry Potter materialized 10 feet in front of the massive iron gates. He didn't stumble. He didn't adjust his footing. He simply stood there, an absolute, terrifying monolith of primordial power, bathed in the harsh, localized glow of the white-hot fire burning in his eyes. The crown of black lightning hovered just above his raven hair, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic, tectonic heartbeat that bled heavy, suffocating dark energy into the muggy summer air. Fleur Delacour stood flawlessly at his side, her hand locked in his, her deep blue combat robes fluttering violently in the localized magical gale his mere presence was generating. Harry tilted his head, his enhanced, predatory senses mapping the estate in a fraction of a millisecond. He could literally see the layers of defensive magic woven into the property. Blood wards, soul traps, anti-apparition nets thick enough to bounce a small army. To a normal wizard, even to Dumbledore, breaching these defenses would take hours of complex, exhausting curse breaking. To the Veela King, it was nothing but a fragile sheet of wet paper. Pathetic, Harry murmured, his voice a low, vibrating hum that made the gravel beneath his heavy black boots tremble. They hide behind enchantments built by their grandfathers because they're too weak to generate their own power. It reeks of rotting magic and fear, Monroy, Fleur agreed, her nose wrinkling slightly in disgust. Her Veela biology, perfectly attuned to the pure, sovereign inferno of her king, found the dark magic of the Death Eaters offensive. It lacked the searing, clean heat of true domination. It was just cowardice masquerading as supremacy. Harry didn't draw a wand. He didn't speak an incantation. He simply raised his massive right hand, the ANC Iant black family ring on his index finger flaring with a toxic, radioactive green light, and snapped his fingers. The concussive shockwave of pure, unadulterated kinetic force that erupted from his hand was biblical. The heavy iron gates, designed to withstand siege spells, didn't just blow open, they violently atomized. The metal shrieked and completely vaporized into a cloud of molten shrapnel. The sheer force of the shockwave didn't stop there. It tore straight up the quarter-mile driveway, ripping the ancient, perfectly trimmed hedges out of the ground by their roots and blasting a trench 3 feet deep into the earth. The complex, layered blood wards surrounding the manor shattered like fragile glass, emitting a high-pitched, agonizing scream of dying magic that echoed across the entire county. Inside the manor, pure, unadulterated chaos erupted. In the grand, opulent drawing room, Lucius Malfoy violently dropped his crystal goblet of fire whiskey. The glass shattered on the dark hardwood floor, the amber liquid staining a priceless Persian rug. His pale, aristocratic face drained of all color as the entire manor violently shook on its foundations. The heavy crystal chandelier above the long dining table swung wildly, crystal teardrops raining down and smashing onto the polished mahogany. What in the name of Salazar was that? Lucius shouted, drawing his wand, his silver blonde hair falling out of its usually perfect ribbon. Narcissa Malfoy gripped the edge of a high-backed chair, her heart slamming against her ribs. The wards, Lucius, the blood wards are gone. All of them, in a single instant. Sitting in the corner of the room, looking pale and thoroughly traumatized, Draco Malfoy practically shrank into the heavy velvet drapes. He had spent the last year bragging about his family's status, but the sheer, physical vibration of the magic currently rolling over the estate made his teeth chatter. It felt like standing on a train track with a locomotive bearing down on him. But the Malfoys weren't the only ones in the room. Sitting at the absolute head of the long table, shrouded in suffocating, unnatural shadows, was Lord Voldemort. The Dark Lord did not panic. He didn't shout, but his long, skeletal, spider-like fingers gripped the armrests of his throne so tightly the enchanted wood began to splinter and crack. His crimson, snake-like slits for eyes widened. He had felt the shockwave from Diagon Alley earlier, the one that had violently severed his connection to Bellatrix and his elite strike team. He had assumed it was a ministry weapon. He had assumed Dumbledore had finally stopped playing his pathetic pacifist games. But as the heavy, suffocating, ancient magic rolled through the walls of Malfoy Manor, washing over his mutilated soul, Voldemort felt an emotion he had spent the last 50 years violently repressing. He felt fear. This wasn't Dumbledore's magic. Dumbledore's magic was bright, structured, and fundamentally restrained by morality. This magic was entirely different. It was heavy. It was predatory. It was a localized, suffocating gravity well of pure, dominant violence. It smelled like ancient fire, burnt ozone, and absolute, tyrannical subjugation. Severus, Voldemort hissed, his high, cold voice slicing through the panicked murmurs of the remaining Death Eaters huddled in the room. Severus Snape stepped out of the shadows near the fireplace. The potion's master's face was an impenetrable mask of absolute occlumency, but a single drop of sweat trailed down his sallow cheek. Even his masterful mental shields were groaning under the sheer, ambient pressure pressing down on the house. Yes, my lord, go to the foyer, Voldemort commanded, his red eyes fixed on the heavy double doors leading out of the drawing room. See what insect dares to strike at my sanctuary. Snape didn't argue. He bowed stiffly, his black robes billowing as he strode toward the doors. Yaxley, Travers, and the Caro twins drew their wands, moving to follow him, their faces twisted into masks of desperate, terrified bravado. Outside, Harry and Fleur were walking up the ruined driveway. The air around them shimmered with intense thermal distortion. A trio of albino peacocks, driven mad by the magical pressure, screeched and ran blindly across the lawn. Harry didn't even look at them. His white-hot eyes were fixed completely on the massive, ornate oak front doors of the manor. "They are waiting for us inside," Fleur noted, her pitch-black Veela eyes seeing through the stone walls, tracking the frantic, terrified magical signatures scurrying around the foyer like trapped rats. "I know," Harry replied, his heavy boots crunching rhythmically on the gravel. "Let's introduce ourselves." They reached the top of the wide marble steps. Harry didn't pause. He didn't knock. He raised his right boot and kicked the center of the massive double doors. The kinetic transfer was apocalyptic. The 10-foot-tall, reinforced oak doors were violently ripped from their hinges, splintering into thousands of lethal, jagged projectiles that exploded into the grand foyer like a claymore mine. Inside the foyer, Snape, Yaxley, and the Carrows had just taken up defensive positions. They didn't even have time to raise their wands. The explosion of the doors hit them like a physical tidal wave. Yaxley and Alecto, Carrow were instantly impaled by massive shards of oak, their bodies violently thrown backward to pin them against the sweeping marble staircase. Amicus Carrow's head was completely removed by a flying piece of iron hinge. Only Snape, relying on decades of hyper-vigilant paranoia and a desperate, wandless shield charm, managed to survive, though the kinetic shockwave violently threw him across the slick marble floor, shattering his shoulder as he slammed into the base of a Greek statue. Harry walked into the foyer, stepping over the bleeding, twitching corpses of the Death Eaters without a single glance. The dust and splinters settled around his broad shoulders. He looked down at Snape, who was clutching his ruined shoulder, gasping for breath, his dark eyes wide with absolute, mind-breaking shock. Snape looked at the towering figure. He saw the raven hair. He saw the facial structure. He saw the ghost of James Potter, but it was twisted, magnified, and layered with the terrifying, predatory grace of a mythological god. And then, he saw the eyes. The white-hot, swirling rings of absolute fire. "Potter," Snape wheezed, blood dripping from his lip, his entire worldview completely shattering in real time. This wasn't the arrogant, mediocre, emotionally volatile teenager he had spent 5 years mentally torturing. This was a cataclysm. Harry stopped next to Snape. He looked down at the bleeding potions master. The Veela King's consciousness merged perfectly with Harry's human memories. He remembered every sneer, every deduction of points, every moment this bitter, pathetic man had projected his high school insecurities onto an abused orphan. Harry leaned down, his massive hand shooting out to grab Snape by the throat. He hoisted the man off the marble floor with one arm effortlessly. Snape choked, his hands clawing weakly at Harry's forearm. "Hello, Severus," Harry purred, his voice a low, terrifying bass that vibrated through Snape's skull. "I heard you have a knack for reading minds. Why don't you try reading mine right now?" Snape couldn't breathe, but the pure, unadulterated terror in his eyes spoke volumes. He didn't need legilimency. The aura radiating off Harry was screaming absolute, merciless death. "That's what I thought," Harry sneered. "You spent your whole life playing double agent, hiding behind Dumbledore's robes and Voldemort's fear. Pretending you were the smartest man in the room. You're just a pathetic, bitter coward who couldn't handle rejection." Harry didn't kill him, he wanted him to watch. He violently threw Snape aside like a piece of garbage. Snape hit the marble wall with a sickening crunch and slumped to the floor, unconscious and completely broken. "Leave him," Harry commanded, not looking back at Fleur. "I won." Tell him to wake up and realize his entire life's work was completely pointless. Harry turned his burning gaze toward the heavy, mahogany doors leading to the drawing room. He could feel the cold, rotting, fractured soul of Tom Riddle waiting on the other side. The ancient Veela magic in his blood was practically howling, demanding the absolute extermination of the unnatural parasite. Harry placed his hand flat against the mahogany doors. He didn't blast them, he simply pushed his localized heat into the wood. The heavy doors instantly flash ignited, burning to pure white ash in a fraction of a second, leaving the entrance entirely open. He stepped into the drawing room. The silence in the room was absolute. 20 remaining Death Eaters, the absolute elite of Voldemort's inner circle, stood frozen, their wands raised, their hands shaking violently. They looked at the massive, glowing juggernaut stepping through the ashes of the doorway, and their brains completely short-circuited. Lucius Malfoy took a single, involuntary step backward, bumping into the long dining table. Narcissa threw her arms around Draco, shielding him with her own body, openly weeping. Sitting at the head of the table, Lord Voldemort finally stood up. The Dark Lord was tall, unnaturally thin, his skin the color of a bleached skull. He raised his bone-white wand, his crimson eyes locking onto Harry's burning white gaze. The clash of their auras was immediate and visceral. The air in the room actually began to crackle with static electricity, the temperature violently fluctuating between freezing cold and searing heat. "Harry Potter," Voldemort hissed, his high, cold voice trying desperately to project the absolute authority he had held for decades. But there was a tremor in it, a microscopic, terrifying realization that he was no longer the most dangerous thing in the room. "What is this trick? What dark magic has Dumbledore pumped into your veins?" Harry laughed. It was a dark, boomy-ing sound that rattled the remaining crystal in the chandelier. "Dumbledore," Harry mocked, his heavy boots slow and deliberate as he walked down the length of the room, completely ignoring the 20 wands pointed at him. Fleur flanked him perfectly, her Veela talons fully extended, her eyes pitch black, waiting for the slightest twitch from the surrounding Death Eaters. Dumbledore is currently sitting in his office, shitting himself, trying to figure out how he lost complete control of the board. "He didn't give me this, Tom. You did." Voldemort's crimson eyes narrowed into slits. "I did nothing of the sort." "Yes, you did," Harry countered, stopping 15 feet away from the Dark Lord. "He didn't draw a wand. He just stood there, his hands resting casually at his sides, the crown of black lightning flaring aggressively. You marked me, you tied our fates together. You murdered my parents, you forced me to live in a closet, and you shoved a piece of your rotting, fractured soul into my forehead. For 15 years, your pathetic little soul shard sat in my head like a leech." A collective gasp of sheer, unadulterated horror rippled through the Death Eaters. The Dark Lord's deepest, most heavily guarded secret had just been casually broadcasted to the entire room. Voldemort's face twisted into a mask of pure, murderous rage. "Silence!" Voldemort shrieked, snapping his wand forward. Crucio. The red beam of the unforgivable curse tore across the room, moving at blinding speed, aimed directly at Harry's chest. Harry didn't block it, he didn't dodge. The curse slammed directly into the center of his chest. The red light flared, illuminating the dark Henley he wore, and then it simply absorbed into his skin. Voldemort froze. The Death Eaters froze. Harry slowly tilted his head, a cold, predatory smile stretching across his aristocratic face. "Is that it? Is that the best the great Dark Lord can do? Pain? Tom, you have absolutely no idea what pain is. The mag I see waking up inside my bloodline burned me alive from the inside out. Your little torture curse feels like a static shock. Impossible." Voldemort roared, his skeletal face contorting in complete panic. He had never, in his entire existence, encountered a wizard who could physically absorb an unforgivable curse without a wand, without a shield, without so much as flinching. Avada Kedavra. The blinding green light of the killing curse erupted from the wand. It was thick, heavy with decades of absolute malice and murder. It screamed through the air, completely unavoidable. Harry didn't even blink. He raised his right hand, the black family ring glowing, and casually backhanded the killing curse. The sound was like a thunderclap. The physical kinetic force of Harry's hand actually slapped the green light of the Avada Kedavra completely off its trajectory. The curse ricocheted violently off Harry's palm, careened across the drawing room, and slammed directly into the chest of Thorfinn Roll. The massive blonde Death Eater dropped dead instantly, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. Absolute, mind-breaking silence gripped the room again. A wizard had just physically deflected the killing curse with his bare hand. It completely defied every single fundamental law of magical theory in existence. Voldemort took a step back. The Dark Lord, the heir of Slytherin, the immortal conqueror, actually retreated. His crimson eyes darted frantically around the room, realizing that his magic was entirely useless against the anomaly standing in front of him. "Let me explain what's happening right now, Tom," Harry said, his voice dropping into a dark, intimate resonance that commanded absolute silence. "The trauma of the Department of Mysteries, the grief, the constant exposure to your rotting soul. It broke the genetic seal in my bloodline. The Veela King woke up. The first thing it did was incinerate the piece of your soul festering in my skull." Voldemort gasped, clutching his own chest, the phantom pain of his destroyed Horcrux suddenly making sense. "And then," Harry continued, his white-hot eyes boring directly into Voldemort's fractured mind, "it completely rebuilt me. I am not a wizard anymore. Tom, I am an apex predator. I am the physical manifestation of primordial fire and absolute domination. You spent your entire life mutilating your soul, terrified of death, desperately trying to become immortal. You are just a pathetic, scared little boy who split his soul into pieces because he couldn't handle the reality of his own mortality. Kill him, Voldemort shrieked, completely losing his mind to absolute terror. He spun toward the remaining Death Eaters. All of you, kill him now. The Death Eaters hesitated for a fraction of a second, but their fear of Voldemort temporarily overrode their terror of Harry. 19 wands snapped up. A barrage of blasting curses, cutters, and killing curses erupted from the flanks. Fleur, Harry murmured. With pleasure, Monroy. Fleur hissed. The French witch didn't cast a shield. She didn't use a wand. She simply unleashed the full, unadulterated combat form of the Veela Queen. A blinding shock. K-wave of silver and blue fire erupted from her body. Massive, ethereal wings of localized plasma tore from her back, stretching 10 feet across the room. She let out a piercing, demonic, avian screech that physically shattered the eardrums of the closest Death Eaters. She moved faster than human synapses could process. She didn't dodge the spells, she simply phased through them, her body temporarily converting to pure, localized light. She slammed into the left flank of the Death Eaters like a scythe through wheat. Her obsidian talons flashed in the dim light. She didn't bother with spells. She used sheer, brutal physical trauma enhanced by ancient magic. She decapitated Travers with a single swipe. She drove her hand completely through the chest of McDougal, ripping his spine out through his sternum. The blood hit the walls in massive, abstract arcs. The remaining Death Eaters screamed in absolute panic, abandoning their attack on Harry and desperately trying to defend themselves against the beautiful, terrifying meat grinder tearing through their ranks. Harry ignored the slaughter entirely. His white-hot gaze never left Voldemort. "It's just you and me now, Tom," Harry said smoothly, stepping over the shattered remains of a high-backed chair. Voldemort was hyperventilating. His skeletal chest heaved. He realized he couldn't win a magical duel. He needed raw, catastrophic destruction. He raised his U-wand high above his head, his face twisting into a mask of pure, suicidal madness. "If I cannot kill you," Voldemort roared, his voice cracking, "I will burn this entire estate to ash with you inside it." Fiendfire. A massive torrent of cursed, sentient fire erupted from the tip of Voldemort's wand. The flames were completely black, roaring with the screams of tortured souls. The fire instantly took the shape of massive, demonic serpents and chimeras, expanding violently to consume the entire drawing room. The heat was instantaneous and absolute, melting the silver cutlery on the table into slag. The remaining Death Eaters shrieked in terror as their own master's fire turned on them. Fleur, completely unbothered by the heat, simply wrapped her ethereal wings around herself, creating an impenetrable dome of Veela magic that the fiendfire couldn't breach. Voldemort directed the massive, black fire serpents directly at Harry, intending to incinerate him at a subatomic level. Harry stood entirely still as the wall of cursed black fire crashed down on him. For 3 seconds, Harry Potter was completely obscured by the absolute darkest, most destructive fire known to wizard kind. Voldemort lowered his wand, a breathless, hysterical cackle escaping his thin lips. He had done it. Nothing survived fiendfire. Then, the black flames violently parted. Harry walked out of the inferno. He wasn't just unburned, he was actually absorbing the fire. The cursed black flames were spiraling around his forearms, being violently pulled into his skin, feeding his core. To the Veela King, fire wasn't a weapon used against him. Fire was his native element. "You're using fire against me, Tom?" Harry asked, his voice echoing with mocking, god-like amusement. "That's like trying to drown an ocean." Voldemort backed away, dropping his wand completely. The Dark Lord had been broken. The reality of his absolute, pathetic inadequacy completely shattered his mind. He turned, his black robes billowing, and actually tried to run. The most feared dark wizard in a century abandoned his followers, abandoned his pride, and sprinted toward the shattered double doors to escape. Harry didn't run after him. He just reached out his hand and closed his fist. An invisible, localized gravity well of pure, kinetic force violently clamped around Voldemort's legs. The Dark Lord was ripped off his feet, slamming face first into the hardwood floor with a sickening crunch. His skeletal nose broke, smearing dark, unnatural blood across the polished wood. Harry walked slowly toward him. The heavy thud of his boots was the only sound in the room, save for the crackling of the dying fiendfire and the wet tearing sounds of Fleur finishing off the last of the Death Eaters in the corner. Harry grabbed Voldemort by the back of his black robes and violently hauled him up to his knees. The Dark Lord was a pathetic sight. His face was covered in blood, his crimson eyes wide with absolute, primal terror. "Look at me," Harry commanded, his voice vibrating with absolute, tyrannical authority. Voldemort slowly raised his head, looking into the white-hot, swirling rings of fire. "You split your soul into 6 pieces," Harry said quietly, the dark resonance of his voice echoing in the ruined room. "You thought it made you immortal. But all it did was make you fragile. You don't have enough soul left to hold onto your magic. And I am going to take it all from you." Harry placed his massive, glowing hand completely over Voldemort's snake-like face. His hard fingers dug into the Dark Lord's skull. "No. Please," Voldemort actually whispered, a pathetic, high-pitched plea escaping his lips. "The king does not grant mercy to parasites," Harry replied. Harry unleashed the full, unadulterated power of the Veela King's soul directly into Voldemort's skull. He didn't use a spell. He used raw, primordial extraction. He completely clamped onto Voldemort's magical core and violently ripped it backward. The scream that erupted from Lord Voldemort was not human. It was the sound of a mutilated soul being violently torn apart at the seams. A blinding, localized flash of sickly green and black magic exploded from Voldemort's body, funneling directly into Harry's palm, where it was instantly incinerated by the white-hot fire of the Veela King. Harry didn't stop at the magic. He dug deeper, his ancient will locking onto the pathetic, shivering main fragment of Tom Riddle's soul. With a violent, merciless mental yank, Harry completely ripped the soul out of the physical vessel. The physical body of Lord Voldemort violently seized, his back arching impossibly, and then, he simply dissolved. The dark magic holding his artificial body together was gone. The skeletal frame collapsed into a pile of fine, gray ash on the Persian rug. It was over. Decades of terror, 2 brutal wars, and the most feared dark wizard in modern history as completely erased from existence in a matter of seconds by the bare hands of a teenager who had finally woken up. Harry stood up slowly, wiping a smudge of ash from his dark Henley. He felt the ambient magic in the room settling. He felt the sudden, massive power vacuum in the country. The dark mark on the arms of every surviving Death Eater across the globe just burned completely away, leaving unscarred skin and a profound sense of emptiness. Harry turned around. The drawing room was a charnel house. 20 of the most dangerous wizards in Britain were completely butchered, their bodies scattered across the ruined furniture. Fleur stood in the center of the carnage, her ethereal wings fading back into her skin, her obsidian talons retracting. She was completely covered in blood, but her face was flushed with intense, intoxicating heat. She looked at Harry, standing victorious over the ashes of the Dark Lord, and the royal bond practically screamed with validation. She walked toward him, stepping over the corpses with flawless grace. She didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees right in front of him, pressing her blood-stained face against his thigh, her arms wrapping tightly around his legs. "The king is absolute," Fleur whispered reverently, her voice vibrating with absolute, unconditional worship. "The false lord is dead." Harry reached down, his large hand burying into her silver blonde hair, gently stroking the strands. The possessive fire in his chest flared, a dark, heavy warmth that grounded him. "Stand up, little bird. You don't bow in the blood of our enemies. You stand beside me." Fleur rose smoothly, pressing herself flush against his side, entirely uncaring of the gore on her robes. Her eyes, back to their deep, oceanic blue, looked up at him with starving devotion. A sudden, pathetic whimpering sound broke the silence. Harry turned his burning gaze toward the far corner of the room. Lucius, Narcissa, and Draco Malfoy were still alive. They were huddled together behind a shattered display cabinet, completely paralyzed by the sheer, mind-breaking trauma of what they had just witnessed. They had watched their immortal master, the dark god they had served and feared, get completely physically deconstructed by Harry Potter's bare hands. Harry walked slowly toward them. His heavy boots crushed the scattered crystal on the floor. Lucius Malfoy, the proud, arrogant pureblood patriarch, completely broke. He scrambled forward on his hands and knees, completely ignoring the shards of glass cutting into his skin. He threw himself prostrate at Harry's feet, pressing his forehead directly into the ashes of Voldemort that coated the floor. "Mercy, Lord," Lucius sobbed, his voice completely devoid of its aristocratic drawl. He was crying hysterically, his whole body shaking. We were forced. We surrender the House of Malfoy. We surrender everything. Our wealth, our votes, our lives. Please, my lord, I beg you, spare my wife and son." Harry looked down at the pathetic, groveling man. He felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no vindication, just the cold, calculating assessment of a conqueror looking at a newly acquired asset. "Stand up, Lucius," Harry commanded, his voice dead and emotionless. Lucius scrambled to his feet, keeping his head completely bowed, not daring to meet Harry's white-hot gaze. He was trembling so violently he could barely stand. "Your master was a weak, fractured idiot who relied on fear to control you," Harry said slowly. "I do not rely on fear. I rely on absolute, fundamental authority. The House of Malfoy now belongs to the Veela crown. Your vaults are mine. Your political influence is mine. Your very lives are entirely dependent on my continued goodwill." "Yes, my lord," Lucius babbled frantically. "Absolutely, my lord, anything you require." Harry looked past Lucius, locking eyes with Draco. The blonde boy was pale as a ghost, tears streaming down his face, clutching his mother's robes like a terrified toddler. He had spent years bullying Harry, calling him a half-blood, hiding behind his father's money and status. Now, he realized that all of it meant absolutely nothing. "Draco," Harry said softly. Draco flinched violently as if he had been struck physically. "Why yes, Potter, I mean, my lord. You are going to walk out to the gates," Harry ordered, his voice carrying the heavy, irresistible weight of the bloodline. "The Aurors from the Ministry are likely gathering their pathetic courage to come investigate the explosion. You will tell them that the war is over. You will tell them that Lord Voldemort is dead, and his inner circle has been eradicated. And then, you will tell them that the Veela King has claimed Malfoy Manor as his sovereign territory, and anyone who crosses the property line will be executed." Draco nodded frantically, his jaw trembling. He didn't wait for a second order. He practically sprinted out of the ruined drawing room, despair to get away from the suffocating pressure of Harry's aura. Harry turned back to Lucius and Narcissa. "Clean this mess up, throw the bodies in the courtyard and burn them. And then prepare the master suite. My queen and I require rest." Lucius didn't hesitate. He immediately drew his wand, his hands shaking, and began desperately levitating the mutilated corpses of his former colleagues out of the room. Completely broken and subservient, Harry turned away, wrapping his arm around Fleur's waist. They walked out of the charnel house of the drawing room, heading toward the grand staircase. They had just reached the first landing when the shattered front doors of the manor blew completely open again. Harry stopped, leaning against the marble banister, looking down into the ruined foyer. Albus Dumbledore strode into the manor, his wand drawn, his silver beard whipping in the wind. Behind him, the entire Order of the Phoenix poured into the foyer: Remus, Moody, Kingsley, Tonks, Arthur, and Molly Weasley. They had felt the massive magical discharge. They had assumed Voldemort had finally launched his endgame. They came ready for a desperate, final stand. Dumbledore stopped dead in the center of the foyer. He looked at the completely atomized front doors. He looked at the massive, bloody spike pinning Electo Carrow to the wall. He looked at the pool of blood surrounding the unconscious form of Severus Snape. And then, he looked up at the top of the stairs. Harry stood there, towering and godlike, the crown of black lightning violently pulsing above his head. Fleur was pressed against his side, her blue robe stained with the blood of the inner circle. The sheer, suffocating pressure radiating from Harry pushed Dumbledore back a physical step. "Harry," Dumbledore breathed, his voice cracking with absolute shock and a deep, profound sorrow. The headmaster looked at the carnage, realizing that he had completely, utterly miscalculated everything. "My dear boy, what have you done? The magic, it's completely dark. You've butchered them." Harry let out a slow, cynical laugh that echoed through the massive foyer. "I won your war for you, Albus," Harry sneered, his white-hot eyes burning down at the old man. "I walked into the Dark Lord's stronghold and I ripped his soul apart with my bare hands. Tom Riddle is dead, the inner circle is dead. The Ministry has surrendered. The war is over." A collective gasp ripped through the Order members. Remus Lupin actually dropped his wand, his amber eyes wide with disbelief, his inner wolf completely submitting to the sovereign presence standing above them. "You killed him?" Kingsley asked, his deep voice trembling. "You killed you-know-who." "I erased him," Harry corrected coldly. He looked back at Dumbledore, who looked like he had aged 20 years in the last 10 minutes. "Your entire strategy was built on sacrifice, Albus. You wanted me to walk to my death at the right moment to destroy the Horcrux. You wanted to play the noble martyr, guiding the pieces from the shadows. Harry slowly descended the first 3 steps, the heavy thud of his boots echoing loudly. But I don't play chess, Harry stated, his voice ringing with absolute, tyrannical finality. I flipped the board. I broke your pieces. I broke Tom's pieces. And now, I own the table. Harry, you must surrender this power, Dumbledore pleaded, taking a desperate step forward, raising his empty hand in a pacifying gesture. It is corrupting you. The Veela crown, it is a myth of conquest and subjugation. You cannot rule the wizarding world through fear and murder. Let me help you contain it. We can restore the ministry. We can. Shut the hell up, Albus, Harry commanded. The physical force of the command slammed into Dumbledore, dropping the ancient headmaster directly onto his knees. The elder wand slipped from his grasp and clattered onto the marble floor. Dumbledore gasped, clutching his chest, completely paralyzed by the sheer godlike authority of the Veela King. The rest of the Order members instinctively raised their wands, but Harry didn't even look at them. He simply flared his aura. A localized gravity wave slammed into the foyer. Every single member of the Order of the Phoenix, Kingsley, Moody, Remus, Arthur, Molly, was violently forced onto their knees, their wands pinned to the floor by an invisible, suffocating weight. Harry walked the rest of the way down the stairs, Fleur gliding flawlessly at his side. He stopped right in front of the kneeling headmaster. He looked down at the old man who had manipulated his entire life. The man who had left him in an abusive closet, who had let him be tortured by Umbridge, all for the greater good. There is no, we, Dumbledore, Harry said quietly, his voice a lethal, intimate whisper. There is only me. The ministry is dissolved. The Order of the Phoenix is disbanded. The era of pureblood supremacy and pathetic, reactive light magic is over. You will return to your school. You will teach your students. And you will never, ever attempt to interfere with my empire, or I will burn Hogwarts to the ground with you inside it. Dumbledore looked up, tears tracking through his silver beard. He looked into the white-hot, swirling rings of fire and saw absolutely no trace of the boy he had known. The boy was dead. The king had arrived. Yes, Harry, Dumbledore whispered, his voice completely broken. The greatest wizard of the age lowered his head in absolute, unconditional surrender. Harry turned away from them. He didn't order them to leave. He knew they would scramble out the door the second he released the pressure. He wrapped his arm around Fleur, pulling her tight against his side. The war was over in less than 24 hours. The government was broken. The Dark Lord was Ash. He had inherited the soul of a king, and he had claimed his kingdom. Harry walked toward the grand drawing room to claim his throne, his heavy boots echoing in the silent manner, the black lightning crown pulsing with the rhythm of a brand new, terrifying world. End of chapter 5.